Welcome, everyone. My name is Russ Selkin. I work for Butte County Office of Education and the K-12 High-Speed Network. I want to introduce our panel members. On the far right, we have Fred. He's one of the focus group members, been on since the beginning. Fred's also an E-rate consultant. We also have to his left, Kathy. She's also an E-rate consultant, been on the panel forever also. And then to her immediate left is Rachel. She worked with me at Butte County Office of Education K-12 High-Speed Network and started about, I guess it's now 3 months ago. So I welcome everyone and I appreciate your attendance. And I also want to give a special thanks to Fred and Kathy, and then there's some other colleagues. They donate their time. All the material that we have has gone through a lot of rigor review. I'm not saying that we can't always improve it. That's kind of our view here, our mantra. But a lot of work and volunteer time has gone by them in their busy time of the year. Well, we have Jared from the library system, we have Bev, Michelle, we have both Doris and Joe from the Department of Ed. So it's been a great team effort. I think that was it, but oh, Joe from AT&T also. So I want to give them thanks and appreciate the time. So today, just give you an outline or an overview. We're going to take you through the 471 process. As I mentioned earlier, before we started the recording, is that our assumption is you've already gone through the beginner training. Starting the process is what we call the training this year for that. And so you're familiar and comfortable with the 470 process. So that's something that you're comfortable with. Just to kind of a show of hands, it'll help us kind of guide this. How many people, this is their first year of E-rate? If you could raise your hand. Okay. I'm looking out in the remote audience too. So it's usually about a quarter. I guess it's kind of like either short straw or new person, or maybe it's a long straw. I don't know. It depends on it's half full. So we kind of gear it towards the second part of the process. And the 471 was just released, of course, on Wednesday. So we'll definitely take you online and walk you through that. And at probably mid-morning, we'll give you about a 15-minute break. And I mentioned earlier that we might end the session by 12:30 to 1, or if we have a lot of questions and we need to go through some other sections for you, then we will take a lunch break and go from there. So welcome, and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so you can see here, here's a more specific overview. We have general information in the order, discounts, urban, rural, bidding. You guys can read, we're on slide 2. One thing that we have here is that it goes through the sections, and then we'll actually go online on slide 8, or section 8. So specifically, every year we kind of give you guys a review of this, is what is the role of the California Department of Ed and K-12 HSN in the state library. I kind of alluded to it earlier. This is a focus group and panel of experts, and we kind of give you the best practices. There's probably, like a lot of programs, more than one way to skin the cat, so to speak, but specifically in E-rate, we're going to give you what we've experienced as the panel members, and also some input from the FCC and USAC as more of the best practices strategy. One thing that just kind of to let you know about these slides, most of the content is like verbatim from the USAC slides. So it's, lack of better words, is kind of a cut and paste. We do customize it because sometimes their slides, since they're kind of developing this new E-rate 2.0, were confusing. So we did try to clarify some of their information. And things that are specific to California, or that we saw that applicants have historically had problems with, we did add more sections and examples to that. So getting back to our role, it's no statutory authority. So as we go through this presentation and past presentations and webinars this year, that the information is just, again, best practice. You cannot use that in an audit or for justification of your decision making. You want to go directly to the source of either the FCC site or more specifically the USAC site in the slides. So again, we're just trying to help you through this process and kind of give you an overview as well as some specific details. Just a reminder that the January 14th on Wednesday, the 471 was released, and then the window for the 471 closes on March 26th. And I'm sure everyone has done their 470, so I don't probably need to remind you that the deadline for that is February 26th. So if you haven't done it, I'd probably show of hands. How many people haven't done their Form 470 yet? Okay, 99.9. No, it's not quite that high, but I understand why. This is a year of change, and also we have our challenges of our other roles. So it's definitely going to be one of those years where we just kind of have to do the best we can and keep to these deadlines. So just as some recent information since our last webinar and training about the December order. So one thing that we've seen over the years, we have to remember that E-rate, the intent of it was internet access. And the 1997 Telecom Act, specifically what was eligible then was the technologies available to get to the internet. We used modem pools. Some of us maybe had T1. So what has happened now, we flash forward to today, is that the fund had a demand of approximately $2.7 billion just for Category 1 in this last year alone. And they realized that the program was doing what it needed to do as far as 21st century classroom. So there's some things of older technology that will go into more details that will not be eligible or be phased out. And in addition to that, fine-tuning in both Category 1 and Category 2 is that there's been an addition of a 1.5 billion to 3.9 billion. So the FCC feels very confident that with this new change, fine-tuning what's eligible, so it kind of focuses it, what we can apply for in both Category 1 and 2, as well as the increase that they'll be able to meet the nation's K-12 and library needs. Some specific announcements in December was the special construction. Beginning in 2015, allows applicants to invoice for special construction in excess of $500,000 in a single year. Prior, that was not the case prior to the 2015. And in 2016, applicants will be allowed to pay their non-discounted share over multiple years. Interest, fees are incurred the sole responsibility of the applicant. Specifically, what the spirit of this is that they've seen that our nation is having some challenges in our areas, meaning libraries and schools, of getting the proper level of connectivity. So they're kind of, I guess, drawing outside of the lines and being creative. How do we get those last mile connections? How do we get our 21st century broadband to our classrooms? The old rules didn't quite get us there. Maybe there's not enough telcos in the area, so they're trying to get that kind of incentive for you. And you'll see here in a few more slides exactly what those opportunities might be. Slide 7. This is an example of dark and lit leased fiber in 2016. A modulating equipment for leased fiber eligible under Category 1, and leased dark fiber special construction charges eligible for C1 if the fiber is lit within the same funding year. So they basically don't want to see us do these build out of our own networks and then have the fiber sit there without being used. Allow C1 special construction charge to be incurred prior to the commencement of the funding year under certain circumstances. Basically, they don't want you to start the funding year and then be caught waiting for a construction cycle. And I know in the K-12 HSN, that's one of the challenges. We do our ordering, and we want to try to get the broadband for the education network ready for the start of the school year. So these types of rule changes, they're well aware that they needed to tweak it so that we can have our broadband as we grow in the springtime and ready for the fall school year. Requires applicants to consider both dark and lit fiber during competitive bidding when seeking fiber. So specifically, let's say you put on your RFP that you're both considering both dark fiber and lit fiber services or lease services. You have to be able to compare them. So in the case of where you want to maybe look at a dark fiber solution, if your common carrier or telco is less expensive, then you need to go with that. So that's what they're trying to get at. But they want to give you some options where you can get the dark fiber, start kind of managing your own wide area network if there's an opportunity to save you money and maybe get save the program money and get you the bandwidth you need. Self-construction of fiber networks in 2016. And this is an interesting thing because we all understand the environment of how E-rate is funded. We all pay it as consumers, but it goes through the telecom carriers. So in essence, they're basically saying if you don't have a competitive bid or any bid from a carrier, you can start looking at building your own fibers. Very much I guess a political step outward by them because of the fact that the FCC, there's a lot of regulatory and politics involved in the telecom industry in the FCC, but they're saying, look, if there's no opportunities here, you can go ahead and do this construction of your own fiber networks in 16. Permitted under limited circumstances when it's most cost effective. Going back to the example on slide 7. Where it has to be the most cost-effective or maybe the solution that you're looking at. But just, I've taken off for a second my IT hat, so realize that there's a lot of challenges with that, not only construction and project management, but also the ongoing operation and technology services that you need. So if you're going that route, you want to make sure you have the correct IT staff in place or some kind of relationship with maybe it's your county office or colleagues in other districts. And on slide 9, additional funding for last mile construction costs in 2016. FCC may match dollar to dollar up to 10% of the funds supplied by state towards the applicant's matching fund. Specifically, working in the K-12 HSN, this is something that both K-12 HSN and Department of Ed is aware of, as well as the governor's office. So we're going to have some conversations to look to see if there's an opportunity for us to leverage both state money as well as the E-rate money for some of these special kind of situations that we have on slide 9. Nothing specific yet, but we're well aware of the changes that will create opportunities in 2016. Ensure access in high-cost areas. Again, service providers that receive universal high-cost funds must support charges in high-cost locations rates that are reasonable, comparable to schools in the urban. You can see that in a sense reasonable, that's most cost-effective. Big sense that I think there was, when they did the analysis for the change in E-rate 2.0, some of the institutions that did some statistics, I think there was a sense that maybe there's not as much competition or the service is not being provided in certain situations and geographies across the country. Here's another thing. We all know that maybe you got someone to knock on your door in 2010 for the census. So they now are updating E-rate and using the 2010 census, specifically in definition of urban and rural. Formerly, urban clusters population parameters were between 1,500 and 50,000. On the next slide, on slide 11, I'll kind of give you some statistics of what that looked like for California, like in terms of a trend went from one direction where we had maybe more that were rural, that now they became urban. And you'll see in a few slides where how does that affect your discount, because that's what urban and rural can do depending on your free and reduced lunch percentage. Revision for the purpose of E-rate urban clusters will now only include those areas between 25 and 50. Because it used to be at a different range that may not be conducive to districts in California. So in this example right here specifically, you can say of the 150 urban clusters, only 26 of them will be classified as urban. And prior to this change that was done in December, it was a lot higher number. 124 of them will remain rural, thus getting 10% increase in E-rate discounts for those that are at 49% free induced lunch and lower. So specifically later on, one of my colleagues on the panel here will go through that in more detail. But if you are online, you can look at the discount matrix, and then slide 11, that will paint a nice grid picture for you, as well as when we go into the urban lookup tool, you'll be able to know specifically what category of urban or rural your school district or library is in, or your school site. So at this point, I'm going to briefly stop for questions. First here locally, any questions? Okay. Do I have any questions in the video conferencing audience? You can go ahead and speak up. I don't worry about it. And yes, go ahead. I'm sorry, before you go on more, I'm not able to hear you very well. So if you don't mind, if you could possibly get closer to the mic.
I'm wondering about the prevalence on slide 6. Our school is classified as both diabetes and and not only see by now. So I'm wondering if that's something that we can call it.
Your question, you're talking about the internal cabling at your school sites, right? Okay, sorry, this slide 6 is specifically for C category 1, your data infrastructure. So we'll talk more about category 2 when we talk about category 2 budgets, and that's your internal cabling infrastructure. But specifically a redo because technology has changed on the cabling, the diameter of the fiber, that'll be perfectly fine. And then later we'll go into more specific details of what's eligible as well as how you calculate your budget per site.
All right.
You're welcome.
The data connection between them and my fiber.
Yeah, so what we were talking about on slide 6 is specifically between their school site, the wide area network data connection, them and the internet, the connection between the school site and the district office, or the school site and library and the county office or the state education network. Specifically, just for clarification, the question that we had was more on category 2, the local cabling infrastructure at the school site or the library. Any other questions remotely? All right. I'm looking here in the webinar, and I don't see any questions yet on the webinar. Yeah, thank you for that questions, and you guys feel free. Let's see here. I am looking on the webinar. Yep. I'll just check real quick. Thank you, everyone. At this point, and thanks for being patient with me getting us to the next section here. On slide 12, I'm going to turn over to my colleague here, Kathy, on the focus group panel.
Good morning, everybody. I am going to talk about some of the changes that have been made to the discount calculation. Know that some of these slides are a review of what we did cover in our last training session, but they are so important that, and in this timeline where folks are looking at putting together their documentation for their 471 application, it's really critical that you understand clearly what those changes are to the discount calculation. So the big change is that discounts are now going to be calculated on an organization-wide basis. In the past, whether you were a school or a library, each individual location would have its own discount, and that is no longer the case. So if you're a school district, your discount is based on your total aggregate NSLP eligibility. That's your rate of students that are eligible to receive free and reduced lunch on a district-wide basis. And for libraries, there's a big change there as well. In the past, the library branches would have their discount rates based upon the school district and where that branch resided. And that's no longer the case for library jurisdictions, which may have multiple branches. The E-rate discount for the library system is now based on simply the NSLP eligibility of the school district where the main branch is located. So those are pretty significant changes. And because of that, many applicants in the past used to, for purposes of trying to strategize or increase their E-rate discounts, might have bundled certain schools together, in particular for priority 2 application. Note that that will no longer be allowed. What your discount is, either for your district, your school district, or your library system, is what all sites will qualify for now throughout your organization. For consortia, consortia will continue to do a simple average for all consortium members, and so there's not a huge change there on the consortia side. But we will talk about a little bit about what the discounts might look like when we look at the matrix and what you can expect when you are calculating your discount. As Russ mentioned, there is a change too in the urban and rural status. Every location, every school or library location will be assigned an urban or rural status, but the overall either system-wide, library system-wide, or district-wide urban or rural status will be based on whether or not there are 50% or more locations that qualify for either status. So note that if you have an equal 50-50 split, you have 50% urban, 50% rural, you are actually still considered to be urban. And then also whatever the greater percentage is going to indicate whether you're urban or rural. And note that, and I'm going to move on to the next slide, for non-instructional facilities, while non-instructional facilities will still be eligible for the same discount as all of the school or library locations, which is the district-wide discount, the non-instructional facilities do not play into the urban or rural calculation. Non-instructional facilities are not given urban or rural statuses in this new iteration of E-rate. So this next slide shows the revised E-rate discount matrix. And on the left, you have your percent of students eligible for the National School Lunch Program, or NSLP, and then it shows for Category 1 and Category 2 what the discounts will be, whether or not your system or district is an urban or a rural status. And really the only significant change here is in Category 2, the maximum discount is 85% instead of 90% moving forward. So for school district applicants and library system applicants, you will receive a discount that is on this page. You will no longer see numbers like 84 or 73 because you're no longer taking a weighted average of all your locations. It's your district-wide NSLP rate applied to this matrix, looking at your urban or rural status, and that's what you get. No more complication beyond that. Consortia, because they do an average of all of the memberships, may actually have a discount range that is not on this sheet because of the calculation. There have been some changes to the alternative discount mechanism, which is has been used in the past for entities that didn't really feel like their National School Lunch Program was an accurate representation of the poverty of the students that are being served. So USAC and the FCC allowed for a survey, and they continue to allow for a survey so that applicants can go out and survey either their families or and see if by doing that process they get a better representation of the poverty level. In the past, applicants were required to distribute surveys to 100% of the families, get at least a 50% return. If they receive that return, then they can extrapolate those results against the entire student population. That is no longer going to be allowed in this program. What the FCC has decided upon is that each individual survey can just count as a standalone result. So no longer are applicants required to submit surveys to all families. That's not a requirement anymore. It's not required to get a 50% return, but you can only count that survey if that family then qualifies for NSLP. You cannot extrapolate it. So in essence, it's kind of like looking at the survey process as an NSLP application collection process. Do they qualify or do they not? And if they do qualify, you just count that student as being eligible. And because of that change, you are now allowed to use NSLP applications as your survey instrument if you so choose to do that. So you don't have to actually have a separate E-rate survey form. You can use your NSLP application as a survey if you choose. So this next slide shows, in the grid below, it shows there's 2 schools that have surveys that were distributed, and in this case, for Red Elementary, 125 surveys were returned, and 100 were qualified for NSLP. For the high school, 600 surveys were returned, and 550 qualified for NSLP. So we take the total number that qualified for NSLP, which is 650, and divide it by the total enrollment, and that's how we come up with the new NSLP or eligibility percentage under the new survey method. Another change that is coming to California, at least, is the Community Eligibility Program. This program has been around for a couple of years. There were other states across the country that tested this program, and now California is joining this program. This is the first year that it is being adopted in California. And this is a program under NSLP that allows for a school district to take a direct certification rate, and then rather than collecting NSLP applications, they get reimbursed for the free and reduced lunches that they serve by using a multiplier. So if a district chooses to adopt the CEP, they don't have to collect the NSLP application, but they have to feed all students free lunch and breakfast in order to qualify. So This is fairly new. I haven't run across a lot of school districts in California that are adopting this, but this might be something that's adopted over the next couple of years as districts may find that it's more reasonable to follow this program than going through the efforts of collecting NSLP applications every year. So, yes, of course.
A lot of times, folks that are filing e-rate forms don't know what the department is doing.
Yeah.
And they may actually be into that program, so maybe only have some.
Absolutely. So Fred, thank you, Fred, that, oftentimes folks at a district that are doing all of the E-rate process, the data collection and entering in the forms, may not know whether or not your district is participating in CEP, so it's definitely worth having a conversation with your food services department to see if your district is actually participating in this program. So what is an applicant to do since you don't collect NSLP applications, and so how are you to determine your E-rate discount? Well, the SBC has adopted a multiplier, which is the same multiplier that's being used by the USDA for the purposes of reimbursement of free meals, which is 1.6. So what you would do to determine essentially or come up with a number of what we would consider number of students that are eligible for free or reduced lunch is that you take your identified student percentage, which is your direct certification percentage, and multiply it by 1.6, and then multiply that by your enrollment, and that's how you come up with the number of students that would be considered for E-rate purposes eligible for free and reduced lunch. So in this example, we have Yellow School that has 100 or 1,000 students enrolled. Their direct certification rate is 50%, so 500 students are considered to be eligible for free lunch through the direct certification rate. That is multiplied by 1.6, which comes up with 800 students. So for the purposes of E-rate, we are now saying 800 students qualify for NSLP at that school out of 1,000, and that's an 80% eligibility rate. Next slide is the provisions 1, 2, and 3. And these programs under the National School Lunch Program are not new. They are also mechanisms that have been developed to allow for schools to go through a process where they qualify for these programs by doing initial data collection at the beginning of typically a 4-year cycle. They collect the information on students that are qualified, and then in return for feeding all of the students free and reduced lunch, so they don't have to collect NSLP applications every year. So I think a common misconception in the past is that, well, if every child in my school district receives free lunch, then they all are eligible, so I can just say our eligibility is 100%. That's not necessarily the case. If your school participates in provisions 1, 2, and 3, you may feed all of your students, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're all eligible. They don't meet those income eligibility requirements or poverty requirements that are established by the USDA. So what happens with these school districts or schools that participate in these provisions 1, 2, and 3 is that they do a base year of data collection, which establishes an NSLP rate, and that rate is then effective for 4 years. So for the purposes of your E-rate application, you use that rate that was established in the base year, and you apply that rate against your current enrollment every year subsequent to the first year. Does that make sense? And then for the purposes of USAC review, if USAC is reviewing your application and they ask you to justify your numbers, you would show them the base year documentation that shows that you are a provision 1, 2, or 3 school. What is your base year rate? And you would provide that and then your current year's enrollment data. Oftentimes, schools find that this program has a lot of benefits to Provision 1, 2, and 3 because all the students benefit from receiving a free lunch. So oftentimes there are extensions to that 4-year term, and so then you might have to provide a copy of that extension to show that your schools are still participating in this program. Next slide, and I'm on slide 19, Head Start. So in California, pre-K and Head Start facilities are eligible for E-rate discount for as long as they enroll students that are age 3 and over. So, almost all Head Start, with the exception of early Head Start, are eligible for E-rate discount. And because the requirements to actually attend a Head Start are based on, among other things, high poverty, Head Start, all students at a Head Start are considered to be eligible for NSLP. So they are considered to have 100% NSLP eligibility. Note that if you do have a location that is a combination Head Start and early Head Start, the children under the age of 3 are not considered to be eligible for this program. So if you are receiving services at your Head Start location, you may have to do a cost allocation, or USAC will require you to do a cost allocation for the students that are under the age of 3. So,
Santa Barbara,
yes.
Slides are stuck. I haven't tried to use slides.
Okay. Okay, I'm on slide 20. So, what are you seeing?
I'm down on discount calculations.
Is there anyone else on video conferencing that it's stuck?
Yeah, but it's short on slide 13.
Okay, just give me a second.
Okay, hold on.
Or in 520.
Oh. Okay, you guys have to all go to Marin. We'll give you an hour. Just a second. Let me see if this kicks it loose. Sorry. Did that help you?
Thank you.
So you're on 20 now then, huh? I'm sorry, do you see 20? Okay, great. Thank you.
And please don't be afraid to speak up earlier when we run into this issue. We could stop and get everybody caught up. This is our last slide of this section. Our best practices when doing your E-rate discount calculation. It's really important to use auditable data because, again, this program is audited oftentimes, almost universally, in program integrity review. When your application is under review at USAC before it will even be approved, you may be asked to support where you got your numbers. How did you come up with your discount calculation? Is it a recognized data source that USAC might recognize, such as the California Department of Education data quest system, where they report all official data for California schools. If you use another method of data collection, be prepared to defend it. If you do use the survey method, you may be asked to provide USAC copies of all of your surveys. You can redact the confidential information, but USAC may ask for copies of the surveys. If you do decide to use a monthly claim for reimbursement, that's the monthly claim form that's filed with the state for reimbursement through the National School Lunch Program. Make sure you keep a copy of that claim form. It's an official form that's filed online through the CNIP system. Ask your Food Services Department to provide you a printout from that system, to sign it, to say that they are certifying that that data is correct. Any backup reports that have the actual student count for that, keep that information because you may be asked to provide it in PIA before your application is approved, and you certainly will be asked to provide it in an audit. Also, CalPAD Section 1.17, which is the official mechanism for reporting this data to the state, print out screenshots and reports from the CalPAD system to show the date where you downloaded that information, because sometimes that information may change depending on when it's reported. So you want to be able to justify where you get your numbers. Okay. Do we have any questions on discount calculation? Yes.
We use enrollment and pre-reduced numbers from CBIS last '41, and I'm not sure if that's still required, that's right. And at school, who had a new employee with that group, how that information, they certify it, they certify the CBIS numbers from last '41 and how that report.
I believe that the CalPADS data collection is ongoing, even though there is a deadline. Oftentimes, just like in situations that you're describing, there may be a necessity for a school district to go in and recertify their numbers. So I would say at this point, if you have initial data and you think it's going to change and it will be certified before you submit your Form 471, you definitely want to use the certified numbers. If you think this...
And we've been... Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, in the beginner training, we did just kind of encourage people to use the CalPADS. If they're using that, use the 1.17 or 1.17.
Right.
Yeah.
They're not a 90% school like
Oh.
That's why I asked you the question.
Oh, I got it.
So an alternative to using CalPADS is using the CNIP reports that are filed on a monthly basis, which are the actual claims for reimbursement that are filed by your nutrition services or food services department. You could potentially approach them and ask them for the reports that were filed, the claims that were filed in October, to see if and that is an accepted method by USAC to support your NSLP eligibility rate. So if you
Yeah, that's great. Great suggestion. That works perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Under high plans and people are certified for 1.65 to over 100% covered. So that means 100% of our students are covered for trade as well. Is it 100%, or did you go back to the chart on slide 15 and it's 85%? That is qualified for trade.
So your direct certification rate, when you multiply it by 1.6, is higher than 100%.
That's correct.
Then your district or your locations that participate in CET, those locations would be considered to be 100% eligible. 100%. Essentially, yes. For E-rate purposes, the student population, because the direct certification rate is so high that the 1.6 multiplier pushes it above 100%, then effectively 100% is the cutoff, and it's considered that 100% of your population is eligible for NSLP, and then you would qualify for a 90% E-rate discount for Category 1 and an 85% E-rate discount for Category 2.
Okay, so the next question regarding that percentage was based on April data that application.
Okay.
For E-rate, do we rely on what we submitted with a new director station now for
You want to address that, Russ? That's really more of a statewide.
Yeah, and I'll let Rachel add in, but no, you wouldn't be doing duplication. You would just go with what you have in your food services for CEP, because that's what you're going to ultimately submit to the Department of Ed. And so, like Kath was giving the example on the CNIPS, everything you submit for E-rate, you want it to be state auditable, meaning that it went to the state. Whatever officially it was signed and went to the state, whether it's a CNIPS, in your case, a CEP, that's the data and information you want to use.
Right, and I think that April 1st was the date for many that is, especially the initial early adopters of CEP, and I don't believe there's been another round of state data collection, although it might become more frequent. But at this point, and what we're hearing too from other states, that April 1st seems to be the data that is being, that's the date that's being adopted.
And if anyone has any more CEP questions they think of after today, and there's only around 29 or low 30 districts in the entire state that do that, with over 1,000 districts. Just send myself or Rachel an email, because we meet with the Department of Ed regularly, and sometimes they have the opportunity to attend these trainings. But we'll meet with them next week, and we can ask them those questions, and then get back to you specifically. And if it seems like a general question, we'll put it out on our news flash.
Great question. Thank you. Okay, I think we're going now to Rachel with the urban and rural. What's up?
I'm just going to make sure we don't have any questions on the web. And we're looking good. So part of the new E-rate that we're all getting used to are some new tools that USAC has developed for us. One we're going to show you right now is the Urban Rural Lookup Tool. So, you know, in the past, we really just had to know how to use the Census Bureau tools and all that different kinds of other tools in order to know if we were truly urban or rural. Well, now they've developed a tool that we can use. It makes it pretty simple when our address works. So on slide 23, we have the link that goes to the tool. So we're going to go straight there right now and just going to show you how this tool works. It's actually quite simple. Here we now are on the website on the Urban Rural Lookup Tool. And for our purposes, we're going to select a district, a school district system, because remember that your discount is based on your whole district and not a single entity. So when you select school district, you scroll down to the bottom of the screen. There's a box that says entity numbers, and you can enter each one of your entity numbers for all of your entities. We'll enter just a couple.
You're not seeing that spot.
Does everyone now see the web page that we're on?
No.
Okay, how does it look now? Okay, thanks for letting us know. So I'll scroll back up to the top of this page for those of you who haven't seen it initially. The link on the slide that we're at previously takes you straight to this lookup tool. Nice little tool provided by USAC. We're selecting school district, As you can see here, I have that radial button selected. And then we'll scroll down and enter our entity numbers of our district, and we can enter all of them here. Just know that if you miskey one, it's going to give you that response when we go to the next screen. So I will miskey one intentionally just so you can see what it looks like. Once we have our entities entered, we click on the button that says Look Up Urban Rural Status. And we see at the top, it tells us what the percentages are for our sites. We have 66% are urban, 33% cannot be determined. So you'll notice that down at the bottom, we have the one that cannot be determined. You'll see what I did wrong is I incorrectly entered the entity number. So obviously then you would go back and fix that so that you get a correct status on that site. But in this particular example, whether that site was urban, I take that back. If that site ended up being rural, it wouldn't make a difference because 2 of your sites are already urban, so you're going to end up being an urban district in this example. Now going back to our PowerPoint, we're going to show you a couple of examples of what happens when your address comes back wrong, or it says that it cannot give you a status based on the address that's in the system. Here we have the example. It says the address for this entity was not found in the census data. Please call the Client Service Bureau, and it gives you the number for assistance. Looking at this address, nothing really jumps out as being wrong. But what we found is that if the addresses are not entered exactly the same as what they are in the census database, then it just comes back that it's not matched. We have another example on slide 25 of basically the same thing. We have one address that shows up incorrectly, or it just doesn't match what's in the Census Bureau's database. So how do you know what to do to get a matching address? Well, some of the things that we've been able to learn is that using the postal standard for your addresses is helpful. As the example here states on the second bullet point, AVE period for avenue versus capital A, capital V, capital E. Those are the small things that can make the difference. Whether this is correct or incorrect, it's not going to hold up your application, but since you have time right now to get these corrected, we encourage you to go ahead and take a look at all of your entities. If you find errors, get in touch with Client Services Bureau and try to get them corrected. Sometimes it is just simple as a period being in the wrong place. It shouldn't be there. Zip codes could be wrong. The city could be spelled wrong. I've seen, for example, Oroville, O-R-O-V-I-L-L-E. One of them was O-R-I-V-I-L-L-E. So it's just a simple misspelling.
I grew up there. That's sometimes how we spell it. It just depends.
So depending on who entered the data on the USAC side when that entity was created, it could be an easy fix. But since you have time now to get these corrected, we encourage you to go ahead and take a look at all of your entities and start working with USAC to get them fixed. When all else fails, call your state E-rate coordinator and we can try to help you out on getting them corrected.
I think I'd like to know, I got a hold of USAC to find out about the very thing. This is like some school sites are saying they didn't count the address. Yeah. And was correct. And she called me back and they said that if we know what it is, start population, we're following that data and we don't know what happened. But I don't know what's necessary with that part.
Thank you for that comment. For our web audience, it was just commented that we had one of our districts call USAC about some non-instructional facilities that had incorrect addresses. And it basically boils down to, if you know that that address is going to be rural or urban, you can actually manually enter that into the Form 471. Like I said, you can manually correct those things on the 471 if you know that you're either urban or rural. What you have to keep in mind is because of the change in the status this year, the updated data, it could be as simple as being on the wrong side of the street to determine if you're urban or rural. So if you could be in one of those areas, Again, if you manually correct it, USAC's going to reach out to you during the PIA process, or at least that's what we've been told, that they will reach out to you during the PIA process to solidify that data. Something else to keep in mind when you are updating your information with USAC is they refresh their database periodically, so it may not be an instant change that you notice, so give it a couple of days before you call them back again and say, hey, it didn't get updated. Just keep that in mind. So are there any questions on this tool, one of the new many features of the new E-Rate? Okay. Time for the bidding process.
So this is part of this. Again, we spent a good deal of time talking about filing the Form 470. I'll kind of go through that again just a little bit, but really, especially since it appears that there are several folks that have not yet filed their Form 470, we want to go through this process and make sure that you fully understand your rules and regulations. The Form 470 starts the bidding process. It identifies the number of eligible entities receiving services. It identifies the products and service that the applicant is seeking bids for, and may include information on an RFP if one is being used. So you need to make sure that, you know, if in fact you have an RFP, you plan on using an RFP or some sort of a procurement process, that you have already identified and know what that's going to be prior to filing your Form 470. My recommendation is that once you file the Form 470, and in that Form 470, you're telling the bidders where they can go and get that RFP material. There's also quite a few certifications of program compliance that you're going to have to check the boxes to make sure that you fully understand the process. So, post your Form 470, and if the RFP is being used, then that Form 470 has to stay open. That bidding process has to stay open for a minimum of 28 days. You have to make sure that you have a fair and competitive bidding process, which means that when contractors, service providers, look at your Form 470, they have questions, they contact you, you make sure that you are communicating all of that information fairly and equally to all service providers. You cannot provide inside information to one bidder, and you must clearly define disqualifying factors or special requirements if that's part of your bidding process. Typically, where price has to be the highest weighted factor that you have, usually there would be other criteria that you need to include. For the sake of argument, you're purchasing some equipment, you need to make sure that that company is authorized to sell that equipment. They may have certified people on staff, those types of things. You need to clearly disqualify. And if in fact, for the sake of argument, let's say there's some factory certification that you need to supply that quote to you, you need to make sure that you include that in your RFP so the bidders know that. If they fail to provide that information, then that may be a disqualifying factor for them. And then also know that you must certify that Form 470 before the end of the Form 471 filing window. So, selecting the service provider. You must select the most cost-effective solution. As I mentioned earlier, the price must be the highest weighted factor. You must be able to demonstrate why a solution with a higher than average price is cost-effective. let me say that again. You must be able to demonstrate why a solution with a higher than average cost is cost effective. I stress that because if for some reason you don't pick the low bidder, most likely in the event that during the review process, hello, can you all still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just making sure y'all are connected. So. All right. Sorry.
That's okay. So, okay. So I should be on slide 31. So I was in the midst of saying that if for whatever reason that you choose to go with a higher cost solution during the review process, and it's oftentimes the PIA, Program Integrity Assurance Reviewer, is reviewing your application for funding, oftentimes they will, or at least they could ask for a copy of all of the bids, and if you go with a higher cost solution, most likely they're going to ask you why, and you need to be able to answer that. Service providers may work with applicants to help them understand the technical needs for a more expensive solution. Let me back up here. It's very important that once you start your bidding process, that you keep all of your potential bidders at arm's distance. And where I'm going with that is that, well, definitely if they are asking questions, if one bidder asks a question, my suggestion is you turn around and document that, send that question out to all bidders, because most likely many of the other bidders have the same question. They all need to hear the same information. But once you've started the bidding process, other than asking, answering technical questions that may come up during the bidding process, for a bidder to come to you and say, well, I've got a completely different solution and I would like to be able to talk to you about that instead of supplying what you asked for, those types of environments, those types of questions, I would not entertain at this particular point. But what I would say is prior to filing the Form 470, I think you, as being a good steward of the money at your district or your library, you're kind of obligated to find out what your options are out there. So prior to filing the Form 470, if you want to entertain, you want to bring in multiple vendors and have them show you what their wares are, what options they have, what solutions they have, that's clearly acceptable. But as soon as you start the bidding process, then this is not a time then that you're entertaining new options. You have an RFP out there, you want to be able to stick to it, you want to evaluate off of the RFP. And also, there is a requirement within the FCC environment that there is an understanding. They've made it extremely clear to the service providers that they must give you their lowest corresponding price, which means that if, for the sake of argument, if they can sell that, if they can sell that data switch to you or that T1 circuit or whatever at a certain cost, they're basically saying that they can't sell it to anybody else for anything lower, any lower than that. So they're trying to make sure that you're getting their very best price on the day of the bid. So what is that lowest corresponding price? Proposed pricing must be the lowest price that the service provider charged to a non-residential customer similarly situated for the same services. The responsibility rests with the service provider to provide that pricing that is LCP compliant. There's really no way for you to know right now today if in fact the service provider is providing you that lowest corresponding price, because you don't have any ability to find that information out. What I can tell you is one of the outcomes that's coming out of the 7th report and order is that now as we're filling in this information into our item 21 attachment form that we'll talk about a little bit later today, and you're given what your unit price is for that T1 line, That then is going to be transparent. It's going to be made available to anybody going forward in future years so that you, the service provider, actually have the opportunity to go and find out and see what your neighbor down the street school district is paying for that same T1 line for you to verify and validate that actually you're getting that same price as well. Applicants are encouraged to compare prices, especially if only one bid is received. What happens if no bids are received? First of all, keep a written record of this fact. During an audit, this may be the only evidence that you are able to produce that no bids were received. So on the day, you put out an RFP, you're looking for T1 lines, and you don't get any responses at all. You kind of feel like you're forced to stay with your current provider because at least you know that they can provide the service. Then you need to make a note to yourself that that's exactly what's happened. You can, so for the sake of argument, you put out a bid for T1 lines, you've waited the 28 days, you don't get any bids, you can at that particular point in time, assuming that you have time between now and the end of the Form 471 filing window, to go out, solicit bids from service providers. Hey, I didn't get a bid from you, I'm leaving my bidding period open, can you give me a bid? And maybe they can, maybe they can't. And then you are obligated to review and evaluate any bids received as a result. But clarification, if you post a new RFP or Form 470, you must wait another 28 days. So say this again, you waited the 28 days, you know what, you're frustrated, you feel like maybe you just didn't get an adequate response, you can kind of stop that process and start all over again. But if you're starting all over again, you're filing a new Form 470 and starting the process all over again. Only one bid received. Again, document this fact. It provides evidence during the audit that you did not simply keep the winning bid. Send an example, send an email to yourself documenting that only one bid was received. The FCC expects the applicant to demonstrate the cost effectiveness even if only one bid was received. For the sake of argument, the T1 line, it comes in for $5,000 a month, nobody else bids it, but that seems to be excessively high, then in that particular case, you still would be obligated to probably not accept that bid, unless you can justify why it seems like it is cost effective. During the bid evaluation process, cost of eligible services must be the heaviest weighted factor. I'd given you that before, and we'll talk about it here in a second. Other factors may be considered by the applicant. Examples, prior experience, personnel qualifications, cost of ineligible components and pieces of the service. So you can provide other evaluation criteria. That evaluation criteria can be developed by you. While you can see some examples on the SLD website of what some of those things may look like, they're only examples and you can use your own criteria. You're not obligated to use what is shown or given by others. So here's a sample bid evaluation matrix. So in this particular case, we've got 3 bids. 30 points of the 100 points was given to the price of eligible goods and services. Vendor 2 got the most points. They were the lowest bidder. But then after that, okay, sorry about that. There you go. Oh, wow, cool. So I didn't do this part of the presentation yesterday. Sorry, we mixed it up a little bit this morning. So in this particular case, you will notice, though, after you go through and award points to all the vendors for all of the different parts and pieces, in this particular case, while vendor 3 did not have the lowest price, they actually were the lowest and responsive bidder, and this is the one in this particular case that the applicant decided to choose, and they were able to do that. So, I do want to remind you, though, that just because this is an E-rate project, it doesn't abrogate state and local guidelines. So the first thing that you need to do once you're getting ready to file your Form 470 and you've identified the products and services that you're looking to get E-rate funding on, first thing that you may want to do is look to see if those current services are under contract. It's currently under contract and you filed the Form 470 last year, you don't need to start a bidding process because you're in the second year of a 3-year contract, for example. But if in fact you do need to procure services, then you can't just file a Form 470, say I don't have an RFP, I don't need to do anything. If in fact your local procurement officer tells you, whoa, wait a minute, we do have some procurement rules here that you need to follow, and you need to follow what those are, state, local. A purchase order may be considered a contract only if the state considers it to be a contract. Seventh report and order kind of came out, gave a little bit of flexibility to what you can and cannot do, but then they still defer it back to state and local. I've never had a school attorney yet tell me that a purchase order is an eligible contract, because you're usually looking for signatures from both parties, something that you may want to look at. Typically, you also need to get board approval, so again, something else you may want to look at. A contract must be signed and dated by the applicant after the allowable contract date, after the 28 days, and that must be done prior to filing the Form 471. The allowable contract date is 28 days or after the posting of the Form 470 or the RFP, whichever is later. Voluntary contract extensions must be clearly identified in the original contract language. So, for the sake of argument, let's say that we're going after some 10 meg circuits. We've got an RFP out there. We're looking for a 3-year contract with maybe a couple of 1-year voluntary extensions. In that particular case, the RFP is going to say that we're looking for contract extensions, and then once we get our bids back, you look at the contract, you make sure that now your contract also allows for those annual extensions. If either the original RFP or the associated contract does not list that voluntary contract extension language, you can't use that at some point in time in the future. You need to make sure that you document the process. Keep copies of not just the lowest RFP, the bidder, but all of the bids. Keep track of all of the communications that went on during the bidding process. You're required to then evaluate each and every bid, and typically there's an evaluation process. You have a bid evaluation matrix. You're going to go through that process, develop a matrix, and then from there decide who your bidder is. So all of that evaluation process you're keeping copies of, and certainly a copy of the signed contract. Now, since the 7th report and order came out on July the 23rd of 2014, now you must keep all of that documentation for 10 years after the end of service. Used to be 5 years, now it's 10. So those are our procurement guidelines that you're going to need to follow. Are there any questions either here or the remote site? Yes, sir.
We provide ISP services for schools in the county, and as we're building out, getting agreements with other telcos and cable vendors, we kind of need to know who is getting ready to upgrade, and things will not only impact us, but the services we're getting from our vendors. Is it legal prior to 470 to talk to districts and find out what they're expecting?
Yeah, so your question again, just to repeat it, just so everybody clearly heard that, was so we're a service provider, we provide services, we need to know what our applicants are going to be doing in the future. Can we reach out to them? And my answer is absolutely yes. But it needs to be before they file their Form 470. So if in fact you do some sort of a survey or you want to reach out to all of your county applicants, then most assuredly you can, and in fact I would suggest that you do that.
You know, and that was a good idea with the way you phrased it prior to this E-rate time of year. I think that's a very good suggestion that you have, just because then you stay clear of this window. Some districts started their 470s in November or December, and some in January. So I think you're spot on.
Any other questions? Yes.
I have a question here. I just read somewhere once before, and I did it that, and I can hear it that Mr. James felt. And he posted an RFP. I saw somewhere that also is that information.
Sorry, I didn't hear it. Yeah, yeah, so yes, I would very clearly, before you put your RFP, what I would highly suggest, if for the sake of argument there were 4 criterion or 6 criterion, whatever those are, you need to make sure that your vendors know what those 4 or 6 criterion are, so that they make sure that they address all of that and send you all of that information in their bid response. You don't want to put them into a situation where you know what you're looking for, but you don't announce that information to the vendors, and then later you take some comments, some board protests because you never announced that information. Very clearly, you need to announce that during the bidding process. And then evaluate off of that. So once if you've got 6 criterion, you have a bid evaluation matrix tool that where you put all that on one page and you're going through that process, then make sure that you follow that also, and then not unbeknownst to the bidders come up with some other evaluation criteria that wasn't announced. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Very good.
Another question.
Yes, ma'am.
My question is, so if we were looking to increase bandwidth with our current service provider, would that have to go out through the bidding process? Or if you already have a language up for levels of broadband, we already have that language. Will we, on the Form 470, will we need to put that out to bid?
So I'm glad you brought that up, because we feel pretty strongly as a company that during this original RFP process, that if in fact, let me give you a couple of different scenarios that may happen. For the sake of argument, we're asking for an ISP service and we're looking for 1 gigabit of service right now, but during the course of this 3-year contract for 2 one-year voluntary extensions or whatever our contract term is, that we think that we may be going up, but we don't know how much. I would assume then that we would want to provide some language in there that says, well, we may be wanting to be going up, or more clearly, let's say we think that in the next 3 years we want to go from 1 gig to 10 gig. So we'd like to know what the pricing is for both. So we would provide that solution. Second thing, what happens if we are adding another site, another school site? We've got one in design right now, but we don't know exactly where it's going to be. We need to be able to add another site or more sites at some point in time in the future. So in both of those situations, in the original RFP, we need to have some language that says that we can grow, both in bandwidth and in sites. So if our original RFP then says that we're looking for some growth, and if our subsequent contract allows for us to add that in the form of an addendum to a current contract, then clearly that would be the best way to handle that. If in fact, for the sake of argument, our original RFP says that we're looking for 1 gig, it makes no provision whatsoever in the RFP to go up to 10 gig. We're not even thinking about that now. And then 2 years later, all of a sudden we need 10 gig. Our old RFP and our old contract didn't allow for that growth, and in that particular case, you would have to put out a new RFP. Yes, ma'am.
I just add that ideally, and this is for if you're going out with a new RFP this year, ideally it would be good to get our actual pricing for the upgrade during the bidding process, have that pricing written into your contract. I know that you can't go back and change something that's already happened historically, but if you are looking to put out a new 470 or a new RFP for new services, I highly encourage you to spell out the bandwidth upgrades and ask for pricing for those upgrades.
Great. Just a summary for the WebEx audience. The original question was that do they have to go out to bid? And in summary, what Fred kind of alluded to and also gave us the details as well as Kathy is that you need, if your original 470 had the language for growth and also had your criteria involved with that, and then as well as the contract has that information in terms of the growth costs. So the original 470 needs to ask for those costs, then you need to have that in the contract specifically to have those growths. So, yes.
Kind of required use for getting RFP requirement to get to a certain quality level project?
Boy, that's about a 5-hour conversation right there. But what I would suggest again, first and foremost, is check with your procurement officer. So repeat the question. So is there a certain dollar amount that requires that I go out to bid? And what I had mentioned was probably a 5-hour conversation. First and foremost, please go to your procurement officer and or your school attorney. They can advise you, and the reason that I'm hesitant is because what I would say is it depends on what the service is, depends upon how much. Prevailing public works projects, it's anything over $15,000, but you need to determine if it's public works. If it's other services, it tends to be, I think it's about the $82,000 range. If it's under the $82,000 for the cost of the contract, not the annual service, again, it's you may have an informal process. Anything over that would be more formal. So there's a lot of conversation going on about that, so I highly suggest you check with somebody in management at the district to get some guidance from them.
And I know some districts, especially I know in my county and north part of the state, we don't have that other resource, and sometimes we can't get access to a lawyer. So I would go with the conservative route. When in doubt, go with the most extreme, which would mean do an RFP. You can Google wide area network RFP, and I guarantee you'll come up with about 15 decent responses. And then the other part of it is, and Fred does a great job in the past trainings. He talks about how if you give out anything in the process of after you do your Form 470, the FCC would consider that be an RFP. So check the box RFP if you're going to be giving out anything in a Word document, not just simple answers to questions.
Any other questions? Perfect.
You Form 470 last year. You accepted a contract, a great contract, a contract agreement with the vendor and project. And it didn't specify that this is parents asking for a increase or increase that now. You still have to go back and you're going to through your contract is coming. I mean, aren't you stuck there? You can't change the vendor, right?
Boy, you're kind of in a gray area there. I really don't know how to answer that. I would think from a very general term, you said in your RFP, well, we're not quite sure what we need, and let's see what kind of bids we get back. And you signed a contract. I could see that going either way. It's probably not the best process. You need to be a little bit clearer going forward on new projects.
Are you concerned about not having enough bandwidth and you didn't specifically ask for the higher bandwidth that you're finding that you need now?
That's correct.
Okay. And yeah, I've fielded a few questions this last couple of weeks where, you know, like the suggestions we were saying, you know, hey, give up to a gig or up to 10 gigs with these price or these bandwidths with these prices. A lot of districts didn't think about that a few years ago, and they're still locked in. You still have another 2 years in your contract term, or at least another year? Yeah. So you are you on CountIT or are you on a separate contract?
CountIT 3 and it may go.
Okay, because on CountIT 3, and I can talk to you more offline, that might be a little bit more appropriate, but just a quick, CountIT 3, you can give notice at any given time. That was one of the nice things about that contract. You can give them just 30-day notice to get out of the contract term. And given the fact that it sounds like from Fred's description and what the best practice is, you may not have done that both in the 470 as well as in the contract. But I can work with you offline. We'll have our contact information. But if it is truly a CountIT 3 contract, they specify that you can give a 30-day notice at any given time.
Okay, so you get to go out and each one to specify a higher bandwidth than the account, and then maybe they don't provide it.
Right. And I call this kind of like, I remember the first few years doing E-rate, I kind of like kept going out on 470 because it was kind of like a cleanup process because I maybe didn't get things kind of nailed down the prior year in my 470 contract. So this will be an opportunity to do kind of like the cleanup process and follow some of these best practices. But yeah, again, we can work offline on that, and then you can maybe break the contract, but you definitely have to do a Form 470 and possibly the RP we were describing earlier.
One word to the wise also is just because you've asked for the sake of argument, some CountIT 3 services, especially if we're talking about high-speed data circuits, you may want to see what the actual contract looks like that the vendor provides to you, because while they may be a CountIT 3 vendor, they may not be providing you with the CountIT 3 contract. Because they may be able to give you more competitive prices by taking it off of CountIT and giving you a special contract. So we're getting into way into the weeds right now. But just word to the wise, you may want to look at that contract and see what it says. You may want to go back, and also I'm working with a client right now that we asked for growth, we asked for special pricing for multiple speeds. They gave us the pricing for the multiple speeds, but they didn't give us the growth clause when in fact they thought that they did. So we've had to go back and had them add that into their contract. So, unfortunately, you're going to have to be the one that looks at that, verifies and validates that they've done everything that they should have done.
Right. Well, one of the things I've seen is they ask for certain deadlines, they kind of provide it, and it's something wrong. But you did your Form 470 plus higher bandwidth.
Right.
But they didn't have it available, and they may be having it available now. You have to then go get another vendor and do RFP. If you did really ask for more at the end.
Okay, yeah. Okay, no, I'm sorry. We just had another question that came in, but yeah, I can definitely work with you offline. So we have a WebEx question. Do 28 days mean weekdays or 5 days a week, or calendar days including weekends? And you know what? It includes the weekends and the weekdays.
Yep, exactly.
Otherwise, it'd take you 6 months if you had to worry about holidays and everything.
Right.
Yeah. Good question.
Perfect. And so I'm just going to leave you with, you need to absolutely make sure then that you've filed your Form 470, waited 28 days. After that, you've negotiated with your vendors. You've got the contract. You've gone to the superintendent. You've got your board. The board has approved that contract, or whatever your process is for approving contracts, and you have all of that done before you file your Form 471. All of that has to be completed before. All right. Thank you very much.
All right, at this point in time, we're going to go ahead and take a 15-minute break. I'm seeing like deer in the headlights a little bit, plus I think everyone we need to get our blood sugar all going, so I'll figure out something here offline where we can go, but you guys come back. Let's make it 35, 50 after the hour, so thank you. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel, and she's going to go through our Cat 2 budget.
Okay, so if you're like others of us, you're still getting used to Category 2 versus Priority 2, Category 1 versus Priority 1. So Category 2 is definitely a new approach to funding those internal connections projects for the program. What is it exactly? It's a 5-year budget for each school or library that funds your Category 2 services or products such as your internal connections, your managed internal broadband services, or your basic maintenance of those internal connections. Keep in mind that if your bid comes back for those same services that exceed your budget, you're responsible for what is in excess. USAC will not fund you beyond what your budget limit is. Now remember that this budget approach applies only to Category 2. There is no budget limitation on Category 1 per applicant. So what exactly is the budget? For schools, your pre-discount budget is $150 per student. For libraries that serve a population of less than 250,000, it's a pre-discount budget of $2.30 per square foot. For libraries that serve a population over 250,000, their budget is $5 a square foot. And every single one of these entities has a minimum budget of $9,200. So your floor is $9,200 if you happen to have a very low population or a very low square footage at a library. Now these budgets are set per school site or library. You cannot share these budgets between sites. It is specific to that site. Non-instructional facilities don't qualify for Category 2 services, so they don't get a budget. So if you happen to have a non-instructional facility that has a classroom on it, that would formerly be called a non-instructional facility with classrooms. Those students are to be counted in their home school. So that home school would receive the budget for those students, not the non-instructional facility. But you might ask, well, what if I have some of my core equipment located at a non-instructional facility, at a district office, or at a maintenance facility? We're going to talk about that in the next coming slides, so don't worry, there is actually a solution for that. It's kind of talking about the same idea of cost allocating. If you happen to have a service, or let's say a core switch, for example, and it serves an eligible site and a non-eligible site, well, part of that switch would then still be eligible since it's partially serving an eligible site. Now, your cost allocation needs to be documented. Whatever method you choose to use, document it so that in years coming, you'll remember how you broke these services down. And your allocation, it can be done in a straight line method where all entities share the cost equally. You can do a proportional method where whoever has more students gets more of the expense, or more usage gets more of the expense. Or you can come up with anything else that makes sense, which would be the specific method. If you happen to use that one, it's extremely important to document your methodology and how you came up with that cost allocation. As we already stated, that expenses that are shared at a non-instructional facility don't qualify for E-rate discount in Category 2, so you have to cost allocate that out. And slide 45 gives us a small example of how that might be done. We have a core switch that's housed at the district office, and it serves 5 sites. 3 of those sites are eligible for Category 2 because they are school sites. 2 of those sites are not because they're both non-instructional facilities, which is your district office and your maintenance department. So in this example, if the switch costs $10,000 and you do a straight line cost allocating, that means each site would be responsible for $2,000 of that cost. 3 sites being eligible, then $6,000 of that cost would be eligible for E-rate discount. And each site would pick up its own expense and would be charged to that budget, which we'll talk more about how sites get charged on their budget in just a few slides. Now this budget is designed to last you for 5 years. You may instantly go, wow, that's not a lot of money. And considering the old method of priority 2, it's not, because now there's a cap on, there's a limit on how much you can spend on this. But whether you choose to do a managed service and spread it over 5 years, or you want to spend it all at once, you can do that. The options are up to you and what your plan is. Now you might ask, well, can my budget increase in that 5-year period? For schools, it can increase if your enrollment goes up. For libraries, it would increase if your square footage goes up. Now what about new schools who don't know what their enrollment is? At that point, you would be allowed to estimate your enrollment, but just keep in mind that you're going to have to true it up at some point in time, which would be soon after you're funded, after you know what your true enrollment is. If your true enrollment ends up lower than what you estimated your enrollment to be, then you will be required to repay those funds back to USAC because they paid you more than your budget. But what if your enrollment ends up, your actual enrollment ends up higher than what you estimated? At that point, you would be entitled to those additional funds. Now, how are these services counted against my budget? Remembering that each site has its own budget. This is where the new Form 470 actually comes into play. The funds that are committed on that Form 470 have the ability to tag a specific site for specific services. And even if you have that example of the core switch that's shared, you can say that I have 3 sites that qualify for Category 2 sharing a portion of this expense. So the system knows to expect a certain dollar amount to be tagged against each site. That's how it's counted against your budget. Now let's go down the line and take that same example of the core switch, and we decided that one of our school sites is not going to benefit from that core switch, but we tagged them on the 471. Now what? Their budget's been tagged and yet they're not receiving the services. At that point, you would want to file the Form 500 to make a correction. Obviously, you'd have to be very detailed in order to return those funds against that specific budget for that school site to free that budget up again. This process being as new as it is, a lot of this is discussion. So we can't look at the Form 500 right now and tell you to go to a certain field in order to return those funds. As the time comes and we're all in a position to have to actually execute, we would hope to have more specific guidance for you. But right now, that's the discussion of how it's supposed to be done. Now, slide 49, the golden question, how low will USAC fund on Category 2 services? Isn't that what we all really want to know?
I think we're going to go ahead and open up one of those web pages like they have the football pool. We're going to do it with the E-rate pool. So
we have no way of being able to tell you for sure how low USAC will be able to fund. But what we can share with you is that the FCC seems to be very optimistic that there's enough funds in the program now that the cap has been raised, that they'll be able to fund all the requests that come in. We, on the other hand, sit back and say, well, how do you guys know that? How can you possibly know that, considering anybody who's been at 70% and lower has stopped applying for Category 2 or Priority 2 years and years and years ago? So do you really know what the true demand is? Well, in the FCC's eyes, what they've shared is they're thinking that because they're eliminating legacy services, the phase out of the voice services, they've put a cap, a budget on Category 2, and they've added $1.5 billion to the program. They're optimistic.
And when we say they're going to fund it, they're referring to over the next 5 years. So that if you don't hit it next year and you apply again the next year, and maybe that's your lucky year. So that's what they mean. They feel like over a 5-year period at $1 billion a year, potentially a little more, that's how they feel like they'll get to everyone in the next 5 years.
The reason we're sharing this with you is because there's been the culture out there that anyone under a certain percentage rate would never even bother with Category 2. We want to encourage you to reconsider, but obviously we can't promise you any results out of it, but have a plan in place. That would be the very first step, because this budget is designed to last for 5 years. If you just jump out there and say, well, the CDE told us to apply, or K-12 HSN told us to apply, or Russ told me to apply, it doesn't matter. Have a plan. Have a plan in place, and if your plan is legitimate and it really does fit your needs, go ahead and apply.
You can blame me. It's okay if it doesn't work
Everybody
out.
Everybody
else is going to blame me, so that's fine. I got used to it.
If there isn't funds available, at least the FCC will have a better idea of what the true demand is. Maybe they'll add more money if they need to. But that's the point, is don't let old thinking influence you on today, because E-rate has such a new face today. Are there any questions on the new Category 2 budget? I believe Kathy is going to talk to us about the new features of the Form 471.
Russ, could you refresh the broadcast screen? It's locked on the Urban lookup tool.
Okay, we sure will. It's like hitting stop and refresh on a browser. Did that do it for you?
Yeah, you got the new 471 screen up now.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the new Form 471, and then Rachel is actually going to show you what it looks like. She's going to walk through some screens with you. But know that the new Form 471 is totally different from anything you've seen in the past at USAC. It's in a completely different format. It's not on the same system as the old forms. It's on a brand new system, brand spanking new. We're talking Wednesday was its go live date. And so with, I'm sure, especially the you techie folks know that anytime you launch a new system, there are some glitches. So I think one of the takeaways that we'd like to give you today is that while the new system is much more user-friendly, the interface is so much friendlier and makes a lot more logical sense. It looks like it's current with 2015. It's not on this old infrastructure. Be patient as you're working through their system, because they are still working out the bugs. And if you are in the program and you are encountering problems, please do call USAC, call the Client Services Bureau to let them know what those problems are so that they can start resolving those. We've heard that USAC will be continually pushing out software updates to the new system through the window. So again, if you are looking to file your applications early, by all means go in and get those filed. Otherwise, if you're not quite at the point where you want to file your application, go in and play around with the system so you can get familiar with the way that it flows, because it is totally different than it was before. So I'm now on slide 52. So one of the things you'll see is that it looks totally different. It looks more, you know, we hear this often, and I think it's true. It's a lot like a TurboTax type of system, where it literally walks you through the form, and a lot of the old jargon is no longer there. It's more common language. So they don't talk about block 1, block 2, block 3, block 4, block 5, block 6. It's just, this is your funding request. These are the entities receiving service. So all of that old jargon is gone. There are a lot of fields for help, and there are little inquiry buttons that you can click on to be helped while you're working through the form. One of the great changes is that you can actually save your form while you're working on it. Before, you didn't have that option, and I think many of you have probably experienced the same frustrations we have had, in that the system would time out and you'd lose all your changes. What we found is that the system does save more frequently than it has in the past, and then you can actually manually save as well. So that is a great change. And then there are also options for you to log out and save your changes and go back in and essentially resume from where you started rather than having to click through the entire form to get to where you left off. The basic flow is unchanged. So we do start at the beginning putting in your billed entity information, the recipients of service, which used to be called Block 4, we're calling that now recipients of service, the details of services and costs, that used to be called Block 5. Now it's details of services and costs, and the new item 21, which is actually embedded in the form itself and is not a separate document. Another great thing is that there's a progressive disclosure in the new form. So you're not going to see questions or sections if they don't apply to you. So if you are a school or a school district and you enter the application, you will be asked different questions than if you are a library or if you are a consortium. So you won't have to yourself go through and filter out what sections you need to fill out or not. The form is going to help you walk through that process so you will know exactly what information you need to put into the form depending on the type of entity that you are. Another great change is that you only have to enter your information one time. Okay, that is especially true for the recipients of service, which is what was used to be called Block 4, where you would enter in all of your entities and their NSLP information. You only have to enter it in once. And then from what I've heard, and we'll see what happens, is that all of the information that you put in this year can be copied into your form in upcoming years. So again, we're trying to, or USAC is trying to eliminate all of the duplicative data entry, which can, result in errors and whatnot, and just create more of a burden for applicants. They're trying to eliminate that by having you enter information only once. Another change, and I have to be frank with you because we've been playing around with the system, and I haven't actually seen this in effect yet, but this is the goal, is that there is a timeout feature that after 25 minutes of no activity in the form, you will get a warning that your form is going to time out. I haven't actually encountered that, but I do know that we did have forms that after a certain amount of time, and I wasn't tracking the time, we were booted out of the form, but when we went back, everything was saved. So we didn't lose any information. And so that to me was more important than anything, that all of the time that we've spent to put in information, we did not lose it after the system timed out. There are also new templates that will allow you to complete, and these are in an Excel macro format that will allow you to enter in data on your site, like their entity numbers, the site name, the NSLP information, enrollment. You can do that all ahead of time in these Excel templates, and then you can upload these into the system. So you don't actually have to manually enter in every single recipient of service line by line in the form. Although you can do that, you don't have to. You can prepare this template ahead of time and have that ready for when you actually want to go live with the form. There also there are templates for the item 21 attachment, which is where you put in the information about the services that are being received. Know that there are drop-downs in these templates, and I'm not sure, Rachel, if you're going to have a chance to go over those today, but know that you cannot override USAC drop-down menus. So they'll have drop-down menus that will specify the type of service received. What is it used for? For broadband services, are the services being delivered in megabits per second or gigabits per second? You can't override those fields. They are hard-coded into the actual upload. And the reason why that USAC has done that is that the FCC is they're going to take all this information on services that you're entering into the form, and they are going to be using that to compile their database of information, and they are also doing it for reporting purposes. So that's why I know it can be frustrating, and I think we kind of got a little frustrated ourselves filling out this form because we feel like, well, you know, we don't feel like this drop-down menu describes exactly what we're receiving, but we're going to come up with a close enough match because USAC has very clear parameters as far as what information they are seeking from applicants. We talk about this every year, and it's so important this year. Do not wait until the last minute to start on your forms. You can go in and complete portions of your form and go back later and complete other portions, but know that the new form will take more time. You're going to have to learn a new system, and as easy on the eyes as the new system is, there is a learning curve, a little bit of a learning curve. So, and even though it makes logical sense, and once you've gone through it a couple times, it's like, yeah, I think this is pretty easy. You still are going to have to learn how that works. But there will take more. It will require more time to enter in your item 21 information into the form, particularly if you are doing internal connections, where you will be required to list every single piece of equipment that you are receiving and then designate where that equipment will be received, at what location. That takes quite a bit of time. So again, don't wait till the last week of the window. You know, we've seen in the past on the old system that it tends to be a little unreliable at the close of the window because there are some users. We can't foresee that that's going to happen again, but we know that it just takes more time. So allow yourself enough time to explore the form and to have all your information so that you don't miss the March 26th deadline. So 2015 is the first year where the FCC is implementing its electronic submission requirement for forms. The Form 471 can only be submitted online. USAC will not accept paper forms of the Form 471. In fact, there really is, while there was sort of a template form that was approved by the OMB, there is no paper form for you to fill out, so you don't even have the option. So you have to file electronically, although you can still certify on paper. So the certification, if you don't have a PIN, and so you cannot certify online, you can still certify on paper, but note that we don't know in the future that even that requirement may change, but for the time being, you are still allowed to certify on paper. And I think at this point, we'll go to the live form.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, rather than stop for questions here, I'm sure you'll have a lot more questions after we get to see the form, the live form. Before we actually do that, the next few slides are just encouraging you to have some information available to you when you go online so that your time is spent productively. Items that you need to have at your disposal would be your entity numbers, build entity, the one who's actually paying all the bills, and all of your sub-entities for all your school sites or your library systems. For schools, you need to have your NCES code, or as well as your CDS code, which is a new requirement this year. It has not been required in the past. Other identifiers for libraries would be, let me get this little thing out of the way, the FSCS code. And we've provided links to all of the websites in case you don't already have this information. You can go find what your identifying numbers are. For schools, you'd also want to know what your district-wide NSLP data is for discounts. Although it says district-wide, that's going to be what your total average is, but you're going to need this information by site. That's how you'll enter it into the system. The system will then calculate your district-wide discount, as well as the system will look up your urban rural status for you. Libraries will need to have that same NSLP information for the district where your main branch is located. And if you happen to be doing Category 2, a Category 2 application, you would want to know your square footage for each building. The last item listed here is the budget information to demonstrate that you have sufficient resources to pay or to effectively use program funds. So do you have sufficient staff development resources? Do you have enough computers to use the internet access that E-Rate is discounting? Those are just a couple of items that just remember that E-Rate's giving you resources to provide internet access, high-speed internet access to your students. Do you have everything else needed to effectively use that? On slide 61, we basically have a screenshot of a new survey that is built into the form, and it's basically USAC and the FCC wanting to know what your current network status is. Is your connectivity fast enough? How many schools are scalable to 10 gigs, or for libraries, similar questions? Do you have, does your district have LAN or wireless LAN capacity and coverage? And then it has just a different list of selections. Important to note, even on the sample on this slide, we have all of the fields in this little area. It has a number in it. You have to put something in each one in order to move forward. You can't leave them blank. So just something to keep in mind. If the answer is 0, you put 0. So yeah, you put 1, 2, 3, 10, depending on whatever the answer may be, because it's asking you how many buildings or how many schools. And then if the answer is 0, you have to put 0 in order to move forward. Now, this being a progressive program, there's some of those questions on the previous slide. If you put a number in one of those fields, it's going to pop up with the next set of questions. Well, if your connectivity isn't enough, why not? Equipment too costly, installation too costly, and we go on to all the different options here. So they're basically trying to get an idea of, as of this application cycle, what's the status of the nation's networks at all the schools. Slide 63 and 64 show the same questions for libraries, but you'll notice they're geared more toward libraries, and it's based on the population they serve, not on a student enrollment count. Moving on to slide 65, as Kathy mentioned, expect to spend more time on your 471 this year, not just because the form is new, but there's also new requirements to the program itself. For example, your telecommunications services has a lot more smaller components that are no longer eligible. In the past, you didn't have to worry about cost allocating DIDs. Now you do. So you're going to have to just spend more time preparing for your 471 and understanding what all of your services are, what's truly eligible, and what you have to cost allocate. Slide 65 gives us quite a list of the things that are no longer eligible. However, this is not an exhaustive list. These are just some examples. You would want to know ahead of time your non-recurring costs, such as installation. Again, this is just for Category 1. Contract information, the length of the contract, any extensions, voluntary extensions, and what the total length of those would be. What is your establishing Form 470 or your expiration date of the contract? And be prepared to justify your costs. This relates mostly to the PIA review, which we'll have a section on that later. Justifying your costs by providing either a sample bill or possibly a copy of the contract. For Category 2, Kathy mentioned some of the features of the new Form 471. It will not allow you to mix a Category 1 and Category 2 on the same application. You have to choose one or the other. So in the past, we'd always tell you, be sure and separate them. Well, you don't have a choice now. They have to be separate. Again, we mentioned cost allocating for services on Category 2 that might happen to be shared with non-instructional facilities. Be sure you document that process so you can step back. Say you go into PIA review in a year, you don't rely on your memory, document it so that you can get through PIA faster. We mentioned this once before, what if the winning bid on Category 2 exceeds my budget? Well, the only thing we know for sure is that the amount in excess will not be funded by E-rate. That's going to be on you. Now, how to actually enter that on the Form 471? Because everything is so brand new, we can't tell you what best practices is yet. We're going to have to go through a year of one full cycle to know how are the PIA questions going to come back to us based on how we design the Form 471. Unfortunately, it's going to be that kind of trial and error period for all of us. So we don't have best practices to share with you at this point, except to say document whatever you choose to do. However you choose to fill out your Form 471, have the backup documentation to support it. So those are just some of the steps to get you ready to go online. Are you ready to actually see the form now?
I was about 5 slides ago. I can't wait.
You're welcome. Here we have it. I want to highlight one thing for you. The SLD has created a test site. So we encourage you to use it. I'd love to see if you can break it. We're all concerned about whether or not, there's going to be issues. So feel free to use it every day until you're ready to do your own form. But keep in mind, the way you know that you're on the test site is you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen, it says SLD training site in big red letters. That is not on the live site. It's only on the training site. So let's go ahead and get started. It was mentioned earlier that you have the ability to save your form at any time, as highlighted in the top area that I'm hovering over right now. Before I get too far into this, can all of the remote sites see the website that I'm on right now for the Form 471?
No, but I have it up on my Chromebook.
Okay. I'll see if we can get this pushed out to you guys.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. So we have the Save button at the top. You can also print it, and you can log out. That's on every screen. So as you progress through the application, you will always have those options at the top of the screen. So scrolling down on our home page for the Form 471, we are simply going to start a new one. Our next screen asks us for the build entity number, so this would be the parent organization like the district or the library system that's paying the build.
The screen is on again.
The screen is gone again.
You guys have the,
I still can't see it.
yeah, I'm sorry, I think it's kind of a local system setup. If you possibly could kind of nudge your tech when you can. I'll keep pushing this out there, but since most of you guys are okay, not sure there's anything I can do.
If you happen to have a laptop with you, feel free to go online right now using the link that's in the slides, and you can follow through the same process. If not, that test website is available for you at any time, and you'll have lots of opportunities to practice through this.
How do you get to the test website?
If you have our slides,
Yeah. Is that where you go to the Form 471 where normally you start filling out? Because I don't see a test there.
If you go,
see a Form 471.
if you go to our slides, the PowerPoint, on slide 70 is a link to the test website.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So here we are back at our website for the Form 471. We've entered our entity number, our build entity, and now we'll click the button next to it that says Enter. And it's going to populate the information for us. Scrolling down, the next question asks is our FCC registration number. If you don't know what your number is, the link at the bottom, it says forgot your FCCRN. It actually works. It will take you to the FCC website and you can look up your registration number. The FCC registration number goes off of the district name. They're two completely different systems. They're not connected. There is a wildcard feature you can use on searching for name, and I use that most often because depending on who called in and requested the number, they could have said Butte COE for the name, or they could have spelled the whole thing out, or any other abbreviations within. Now that we've entered our FCC registration number, we'll click Next. Very important point. If you have pop-up blockers on, you're eventually going to get to a part of this form that you cannot move forward. So if you get stuck and you keep clicking Next and Next and Next, that's why. So make sure you don't have your pop-up blockers on. Kathy helped remind me of that today when I thought I was doing something wrong. At this point, we're going to select what type of application this is, and for the purpose of this training, we'll do a school district, and it's a public school district. And here's a kind of a new feature. It's asking the email address of the person submitting this application. This is not the contact person. Later, you're going to be asked who is the contact person. So we're giving the benefit of adding one more person to this process. So we'll do that here. We'll put in the person submitting the application and click Next. And now we have our application number and security code. One nice feature of the program is that this application number and security code is supposed to now be emailed to the person submitting the application. Until you have actually tested that and know that it's functioning properly, that you're receiving the email, I still encourage you to print screen this, print the page, do something, write it down, so that you don't have to start over because you lost your number. Next question is, would you like to give this application a nickname? This is only for your information. And you can call it whatever you choose to call it. USAC says that they will use this in communicating with you if you prefer that they use this rather than the actual application number. It's just another piece of information to help you know what application they're referring to. Now, after we click Next, we have one of those questions, intuitive questions. Is a consultant assisting you? Notice if I select No, well, then they want to know, then who's the contact person? If I select Yes, we have a different set of questions. So this is where the program is, like Kathy mentioned, the TurboTax style. So we're going to say No and just simply enter, now we have the contact person. Oh, they want the name there. Contact person's name. And then the address. Is the contact person's address and phone number the same as the billed entity? You can say yes or no. Obviously, if you select no, then you'll enter a new address. A familiar field is the holiday/summer contact information. It's always nice to put in additional resources so that if you happen to be out of the office, your PIA review doesn't get held up, but they'll have an alternate contact person. Another new field is, where do you want the correspondence sent? That's never been asked in the past, and sometimes it was a mystery on how they chose an address to send it to, depending on what the correspondence was. Well, now you get to tell them the entity address or the contact address if you happen to have two different ones in the system. And then who is going to receive that correspondence? In our case, we have a specific contact person, and we'll select that to be Russ. We click Next, and now we're up to this area of the category of service. What type of application is this? Category 1 or Category 2? And it's nice that it tells you what's underneath each category. Telecommunication services, voice services, and internet access, category 1, and then all of your internal connections, managed internal broadband services, and basic maintenance, category 2. We'll select category 1 for this training purpose. Click next. Yes. That's a good thing to mention. As Kathy just mentioned, once you pick one of those services, category 1 or category 2, you cannot change it on this form. If you've accidentally selected the wrong one, you've got to start over. Most other things in this form you can go back and change back and forth, like, oh, well, we weren't using consultant, but now we are. You can change those, but category you cannot change. This next screen, school districts, library systems, the field that's open for you to enter information is the entity number. And this is going to start with your billed entity number, your head, who's paying the bills in the district. So we'll enter that information and click Add Entity. And now it brings up our entity number, which happens to be named applicant. The next field is enter data, so we'll click there. And here it brings us up to our budget calculation as well as our discount calculation worksheet. Now this one isn't exactly intuitive. You kind of have to know what to click on next. So let's just kind of walk through this for a little bit. You're going to add your entities here. It's kind of like this is your block, the old block 4. Who are the recipients of service? Now, previously on our screen, actually, I'll just go back one screen, I think. I just clicked on discount calculation on the chevron above, and we'll click next. You see at the top here it says import or copy. This is where you would actually import your block or your template for your discount calculations or your block 4 worksheet where you can pre-fill all of this information. We'll show you those templates a little bit later. They can be very useful to a large district. They can be useful to anyone, but obviously a smaller district, you'd have to just weigh which one's going to be quicker for you, to get used to the template and upload it, or to simply manually enter your entities into the form itself. Scrolling back down, we're going to click on Enter Data again and take us back to the screen where we can manually enter our recipients of service. We're going to start by clicking on the plus sign underneath entity number. It says Add New Row, and we get a new pop-up. This pop-up allows us to manually add our entities by simply entering the entity number. As soon as you tab to the next field, it populates all of the information it has available. It automatically chooses if it's urban. It's classified currently in the system as a non-instructional facility, but these all you have the ability to change if they're incorrect. This is also where it's going to ask you for your state LEA ID and your state school ID, both of those being part of your CDS code. Under school attributes, you're just simply selecting if it's not a traditional school, is it a pre-K, Head Start, Adult Ed, Juvenile Justice, ESA, dorm, charter, tribal, or is it new construction? Is the student count based on an estimate? That would only show up if you select new construction. Otherwise, we're going to select none. You'll see that that is grayed out, and you can't drop that menu down. The other question is there an alternative discount used here? Notice when you drop that down, it has in there the CEP or a combination, meaning was there survey and sibling match, or was there another combination going on? So let's submit this one. As we do that, you'll notice it was added to our first table at the top. But let's scroll down and see what else happened under the discount calculation worksheet. It was also added there. I'm going to add one more entity just to demonstrate the intuitiveness of this program. This next entity is Butte County Special Education. We're actually going to tag this one as a non-instructional facility. Now that we've added 2 entities, let's see what we can do down in the discount calculation section. So the first one is Mesa Vista School. As we come down to the discount calculation worksheet, it's classified as urban. Number of students attending, once you click on that, if you can edit that field, it just opens right up for you. And then you can just tab over to the next editable field. But then where it says Butte County Special Education, the entity beneath it, it doesn't have an urban or rural status. Do you remember why that is? It's because exactly. We classified it as a non-instructional facility. It does not get an urban or rural classification. It also does not have the option of entering student data information. So if you find that you are not able to edit some fields that you thought you should be able to, then go back and check to see how it was entered on the main Block 4 area. As we scroll down now to the bottom, let's assume we've entered all of our entities. What exactly is our discount rate? You'll notice it says calculate discount rate. There's a whole section for that. It's got our total student enrollment, total number of students that qualify for NSLP, so that percentage is 50. It also states that we're an urban district, so we're just going to simply click on the button that says save and recalculate. And there we have it. We are an 80% district. Before I move forward, do we have any questions on manually entering your entities? Question here. On the previous screen, the very first entity number I entered was the district. Which is right here where you enter the I don't think we've gotten to the connectivities yet. Connectivity data. This very first screen is just for your main entity, district or library system. The second screen, you've listed everybody, your non-instructional facilities as well as your regular sites. The district office on the next screen where you have all your sites entered, the district office would have a different entity number, not the same as the main one on the previous screen. The main one just simply represents the agency as a whole, whereas on the screen that we're showing right now, it's representing individual pieces of that agency. And each piece of that agency that receives services would need to have its own entity number. Do you have any questions out in our remote sites? I have a question on the website. It says, do we have to add the NIFs, if I understand the question correctly? At this screen for Category 1 services, you definitely want to add your NIFs if they're receiving any services from this application. Okay. Let's go down to the bottom. We'll go to the next screen. And here we have our connectivity survey, connectivity questions. Since we looked at these on the screenshots earlier, I'm just going to simply select some answers so that we can move on to the funding request. I will show you, though, if I answer 1, just simply put a 3 and zeros in all of the rest of the questions at the bottom, I don't have any more questions to answer. That's it. But notice what happens if I populate any of the ones beneath the very first one, the first question. Then I have more questions to answer. just demonstrating how this program gives you questions based on the answer you provide in a previous question. Okay, let's click Next. Now we're at what used to be called the Block 5, where you'd put in your funding request information. So let's do the step-by-step option. Again, it's our TurboTax. Nickname for this funding request. We are going to call this one our voice services. Click Next. Is this a duplicate funding request? Meaning, did you apply for the same thing last year and you're still waiting to be funded, or anything like that? Is it a duplicate, an exact duplicate of a different funding request from another application? We're going to say no and click Next. The service type, this is very important to know the differences here. Remember that voice services are being phased out of E-Rate. So just because voice is telecommunications, and most of us think of those two as being the same thing, in this particular example, this form, voice is separate than telecommunications. You'll know that you checked the wrong box when you start seeing, for example, if you check telecommunications and then you get to the item 21 part and it's asking you how fast your line is, and you just think, well, I just got phone lines. I didn't know they had a speed. You've selected the wrong choice. So in this instance, we're going to select voice services. Click Next. So did you post a Form 470 for the product? Yes, we did. I'm going to make up a number and hope it takes it. Let's see. It's not found. I'm sorry I didn't have this number up here with me. Do you happen to have a 470 number I have access to? Let's step away and grab my phone.
Try 104.
Thank you.
5330 104 6284.
Thank you very much. So this is our applicant's 470 number. Now we'll click Next to move forward. Do we have a spin? Yes, I actually do have a spin up here with me. One that most of us are familiar with, just for sample purposes, TaxBell, and now let's move to the next screen. A billing account number, we'll just call this CalNet 3. Notice here you have a button to add. You can put multiple billing account numbers here if you wish to. How are you purchasing these services? Is it tariff, month to month, or a contract? Since this is our CalNet services, we're going to put contract. Again, contract number for the sake of training, CalNet 3. Click Next. Now it's asking us about the service date. What is the date you awarded your contract? So when did you sign the ATO? We'll enter that information. Next question is, what is the date your contract expires? And next question, when will these services start? When will these services start? It's not your first day of getting CalNet 3. It's the first day of this funding year that you will receive CalNet 3 services. And for this purposes, for us, it's July 1st, 2015. Does your contract have any voluntary extensions? Yes, this one does. How many extensions are left on the contract? We have 2 extensions left. Notice the next question is, what is the total remaining length of the contract if you exercise all extensions in months? So how many months do you have left on this contract? I'm picking a number. You'd want to know this information. So this goes back to preparing ahead of time and knowing your contract length and any extensions you have available to you. Is this funding request covered under a state master contract? And we're going to say yes, that it is. Is it a continuation of one from last year? Did you have CalNet 3 in the current year that we're in now and you're moving forward? If you say yes, they're going to ask you for that funding request number. So for our purposes of training, we're simply going to say no and move forward. Now we have an open field, a brief narrative where you can provide information explaining the services. Take advantage of this because it could just simply be the key that reminds you of, you know, perhaps you forgot something in your documentation and now you're confused on what was this funding request for. Feel free to use these sections for any information you feel is relevant. Now here's a new feature of the program, pricing confidentiality. Is there a statute, rule, or other restriction that prohibits you from publishing the pricing information? If you put yes, you are going to be asked for that statute, rule, or other restriction. You have to quote it. In general, there are no restrictions because you're public agencies. Your pricing is available to anybody who has to see it. The benefit of this is nationwide. Now we're all going to be able to see what other people are paying for the same services. And that's part of the new E-rate program is what they're calling the transparency of it. So for us, we're going to click no. There is nothing that restricts this information from being shared. And then click next. You now have your new funding request number. It's been created. At this point, you're going to enter the products and services. And this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. How are you guys liking the new form so far? A little bit better than the old one. Now we mentioned
it's the best form I've ever seen, and I love it.
Awesome. That's a happy voice there.
All right, we got some half full stuff going on. That's great.
Okay, so we mentioned the templates in the past. Here they come up again. There is an item 21 template. There's actually 4 of them. So you can prepare this information ahead of time and help speed up the process of completing your 471. When we show you the templates, you'll see that you're going to have to spend time getting used to those as well. So either way you go, it's going to require some time. We're simply going to add a line item here. And we have quite a pop-up that comes. First one, type of service requested. Miscellaneous or voice. We're going to say this is voice service. Type of connection. They see all the options coming up here and how detailed you're going to have to be on your 470 request. This is local phone service only. Some of these is nice when they only have one option. Number of lines. We're just going to pick a number that we've already predetermined because we're ready for it. Bandwidth upload speed, it doesn't really affect our voice services. We're going to put 0 in there. We'll see if the next one allows us to leave it blank or not. And since this is voice services again, we're not going to address the burstable bandwidth. Your monthly recurring eligible cost. And remember, that's because you've already determined what your ineligible cost is. Once you've done that, you enter it in this section where it says total monthly recurring ineligible cost. Maybe this will let me move the screen. I'm going to try to make my screen a little smaller so it fits all on one page. I hope you guys can still see that well enough. If you happen to have one-time cost, you would enter it in the total one-time eligible cost. That would be like installation. And then if there's any of that that's not eligible, you would enter it as well. We'll see how we do on, yes?
The screen is black on my side. Can we refresh, please?
Certainly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did that work?
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So let's click save and see if we did this right. Here's our pop-ups. Upload bandwidth unit is required. So here's where some of these may not necessarily apply, but we have to select something, right? Now we have now completed our first funding request information. Almost. Who's receiving the services? Now you'll notice underneath what we just finished doing, our first funding request, it says Manage Recipients. You click on that button. Now if everyone in your application is going to receive some of these services off of this FRN, you can just simply click the button in the middle that says Add All. But this is also where you get to really get detailed if you choose to, and add only one or two entities if it's appropriate. We're simply going to select Add All. And it says, is every entity on this application receiving the product or service in this line item? Yes. You have the ability then to put percentages, I believe it's percentages. There's an edit field that I'm hovering over at this point for each entity that we added. Because we said that they're all sharing, there's just simply they all get the same percentage. As you can see, it's quite a learning curve. I've done several of these and I'm still getting used to all the fields in it. So from this point, you go through and enter an FRN for each service that you were looking to receive discounts on. So let's click Next. Now we get to look at our application. It says if you have no additional funding requests to create, proceed to the certifications and signature section. This is where we absolutely encourage you to save your information. It's been saving all the way through, so we hope. Go ahead and save it. You can print it and go offline for a while, take a look at this in a different setting, make sure that you've got all the information correct before you choose to submit your application. The nice thing about it is once you're in here, the chevrons at the top allow you to go back to any part of the application you wish to without having to hit the back button at the bottom of the screen until you get to the right spot. Also, we have on the left side another menu bar that allows you to move out throughout the application at any time. So I know this is probably a lot to digest quickly. I know when we first saw this and didn't have the chance to get our hands on it, it was at the USAC training, and it was so much to digest when we first saw it. So we really encourage you to go to that test website and play around with it. Get used to the flow of the application and how to maneuver within different parts of it. Do you have any questions at this point on the application, the new Form 471? All right. Let's go back to PowerPoint. We mentioned to you throughout showing you the 471 that there's a lot of templates available for you. Slide 71 has a link to the USAC website where you can download these templates. Notice that there are quite a few, and there are 4 different ones for the item 21. So whichever service you're trying to put together, make sure you select the right template. We'll just briefly show you these. Here we have the USAC's website with the templates. Let's take a look at the school template for discount calculations. In case any of you haven't noticed before, we have the countdown clock on the USAC website. 69 days, 9 hours. Just adding a little bit of impetus there.
I just try to avoid that being fixed.
Exactly. So here we have our first template. Discount calculations for a school district. Now, some of these are just open entry fields, and to know if they are or not, there's nice little notes at the top that tells you what you can expect to be able to enter into the field. The ones that we kind of want to highlight for you, though, are the drop downs, where you have to select something that's according to what USAC wants to see. Where did that go? For example, school attributes. You notice there's the drop-down menu next to it. If you choose to select one of these, then you would do that. But if that attribute doesn't apply, say it's a regular school, you wouldn't want to select anything there. You can simply leave it blank. Again, student count based on an estimate, you've got that drop-down menu there as well. So once you get accustomed to the template, it will probably save a larger applicant tons of time in manual data entry, because you can manipulate this data right all in one spot in front of you before you choose to upload it. Now, I do strongly encourage you to check out the Item 21 template. I think that's going to save most people time, but they can get pretty hairy if you're just jumping into it. So take some time and get accustomed to them, get used to them and how they work and what's expected of you. Do you have any questions? That brings us to the end of looking at the new Form 471 online. I hope you all enjoyed it and that you'll go back and play around with it some more.
Okay. Since I'm going to kind of take an informal survey, because there was a lot more interaction in detail today. I'm thinking I think I know the answer, or what's the best practice, since I like to use that word, for our lunch decision, is that we have program integrity, CIPA, document retention, program compliance conclusion, probably about an hour and a half. So I think raise a hand, take a lunch break, and then come back. We'll have about an hour and a half, and then we can also do free-flowing question and answer. Does that work for everyone? Take about an hour lunch? I won't ask you guys in video conferencing. Just raise your hand if you can. You don't have to take it off mute that way. Raise your hand if you want to just take an hour, a little over an hour break. I only see one hand, so I guess we're going to just drill through for the next hour and a half. What about here? You guys want a lunch break? Okay. So we're just going to keep drilling through. I'm just kidding. I thought everybody raised their hand. So, and our web friends, so we'll go ahead and take a little over an hour break. Let's see, what time is it now? So yeah, so 1:15 we'll start promptly. So if you're not in your chair, we're going to get going anyway, so we can keep you guys on track and give you plenty of time for question and answer. Hopefully no one's upset about that, but I just felt like I wanted to make sure you get your blood sugar up and get some focus on. We'll see you in an hour and 13 minutes. Okay, so if you guys got all that, that's probably what you should have spent the last 4 hours on, what we just talked about the last 5 minutes. Did everyone, any questions? Sorry, I'm being a wise guy. Sorry about disconnecting there, and then our friends on the webinar, we're disconnected, so you haven't missed anything. Yeah. Okay. Let me get it set back up here again. So what was your question again, Mary?
It was, in the past, we had to wait the 28 days before we could even start populating
got it.
into the 471.
Yeah, sorry about that. So the question for the WebEx people is that can you start pre-filling your 471 while you're waiting for the 28 days? You can't all the way up to where you put the FRN because you can't do the last page unless an FRN's been completed. So you can get to at least that point. I don't know if with the new system, I haven't been on it much, could they put like dummy PIN numbers and information? I probably would discourage that because if you accidentally hit submit, then you got yourself a mess.
There's that. So in order to complete the last page of certification, you have to fill in your entity, some entities, and funding request. Or you can do the next.
Good question, Mary. We're giving a free iPad.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. We're giving a free iPad to whoever asks the best questions. Not really. Yeah, sorry, nothing free today. Sorry. Okay. I'm going to go through any other thing before I start the PIA process. Okay. Oh. Just checking our recording here. It'll be a 600 gig file. All right, so we are on slide 74 now. So what is PIA? So I think we have about a quarter of our friends here remote and local that have not been maybe through the whole process yet. And a review process that every application goes through. So pretty much it's not like you're being singled out. I don't think you have to worry about that, but reviewers ensure that the request for funding meets the program rules and requirements. And we'll give you an example here in a few slides. Reviewer may ask questions and request documentation. Results, the review results in a funding decision on each funding application. And we'll go through that in a second. It's you can see by the last bullet point, if you do the reviewer's request and get back to them and there's no modification to the application or denial, you get to the last step, which is a funding commitment decision. So just kind of a note there on the third bullet point down, there's sometimes special teams conducting additional reviews of certain groups of application, competitive bidding and cost effectiveness, those types of questions, which that's not this particular review. So here's a list on 75 of common PIA questions that they may ask you to provide additional details, detail about the services being delivered. Historically, it's been like with the speed, the quantity. Sometimes your item 21s don't have that information clear, or sometimes they do and they just don't see it. So that's happened before. Provide documentation to support the discount rate. And that's where we talk about in the beginners, where there's a couple things the California Department of Ed can help you with in terms of validation of both your free and reduced lunch and also your sites. So that's where the third party can come in, and there's on a link to our website is the form letter that they request, and then you can send it to erate@cde.ca.gov. So you can go and read full details on that. Provide documentation to show the entity is eligible, especially like a nonprofit type of private school. There's a certain endowment level. Public schools, there's different elements they want to know, CDS code, etc. Provide cost allocation information to save eligible part of FRM while removing cost of ineligible, just in case, especially when we move forward with the telecommunications this next year, because we'll go in more, or actually we discussed it earlier, but we'll go into more detail potentially is the phase down. And that's where some of the best practices that you would want to maybe put those on a separate FRN. And there's specific examples that we did in the beginners of items that are not eligible for future E-rate discounts. There's some additional on 76. Did the FCC Form 470 really establish the bidding for this FRN and the scope of the details, what you're requesting consistent with originating Form 470? And I think earlier when we were going over, Fred did a great job of describing what a good process for you, the description of your Category 1 on your Form 470. So that's one of the examples. And you don't want to, I had an applicant last week, in fact, send me their 470 number, and unfortunately they just did kind of a laundry list. So that would be something that would get you caught up in the PIA if you don't know exactly what you're doing in terms of the scope, and you're just kind of putting all the eligible services. And they also might want you to provide a contract for support contract dates, service eligibility, and then we've talked about making sure that you don't sign your contract until the ACD eligible award contract date. Discount validation, I mentioned that just a second ago, and here's the specific slide that gives you the details for the third-party validation as well as the E-rate at CDE address. And they'll create a validation email and send it directly to the reviewer within 48 hours. Typically, that's what their goal is. The other thing about the PIA is the timing. And so we're just trying to give you best practices here and realize that your 15-day clock starts when these types of successful contacts take place. You know, you have to, from their perspective, they have to start this process within 15 days. So realize if they send an email and no return notification of non-delivery or out of office, a fax. So I know I had challenges in my office where the fax just, I don't know where it goes, but it shows transformation and confirmation. But that would be considered successful, even if you don't confirm it back with a voicemail left and a live person. You know, sometimes school districts have students, and I've heard this where a student took the message, didn't realize they needed to make sure of it. So all those will start your 15-day clock. If you need more time, let's say you get into the first 7 days and you just, something else happens, either personal or professional, and then you try working on the second week, but you need some information from one of your vendors or a carrier, typically they'll let you ask for another 7 days. So I wouldn't encourage you to try to do that, because then you're adding up to 15 plus 7, that's a total of 22 days. Those reviewers have some goals, and I think they have some management things that they need to accomplish. So try to do it in the first 7 days. Plus, just as a reminder, the goal of the FCC for this coming year is to have all awards out by September 1st that are not in a special review bucket or issue. I don't know, they never did define what's considered to be a special review issue, but their goal is to get those non-special review applicants funded FCDLs by September 1st. So that'll be interesting. Okay, you guys got the slides out there now. I apologize for the delay. I can't chew gum and walk at the same time, I guess. So at this point, we're on slide 80. Is there any specific remote questions? And I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague here. I'll check the streaming web. Anyone here in the room? Okay, I'll check the. I don't see anything on the webinar. Okie dokie. All right, Fred.
So for those of you that have been doing this for some period of time, really no new guidance or any additional guidance that we have over last year. But for those of you that are new, I'm just going to go through what that process is and make sure that you have at least the minimum amount of information so that you can file your form. So to receive E-rate funding, you must be SIPA compliant. Children's Internet Protection Act. It was enacted in December of 2002, and it became effective April 20th, 2001. And to be quite honest, probably for any of you that are unless you're a brand new charter school or something like that, probably back in 2001, all of you had to or probably did go through this process, and you probably are compliant. Whether you're new, you probably don't know this or not, but you probably are. So, but you do need to go back and check. So, SIPA requirements apply to all applicants that receive funding in the following categories of service: Internet access, internal connections or managed internal broadband services, and also basic maintenance of internal connections. SIPA compliance is not required for applications for Priority 1 services, other than Internet access. First-time applicants only may have up to 2 additional years to come into compliance. So again, if you're a new charter school, or for some reason you never started the compliance process, then once you start it, you have 2 years to get through that process. So what are the requirements? First and foremost, that you must have an internet safety policy. You must have a technology protection measure in place on your network, a filter, so that you have some physical device there that's stopping this incoming traffic that you find objectionable. And third and foremost, once you have both of those processes in place, then you're going to have to take that before an open meeting of your school board. Before that, there must be some public notice. The school board is going to vote on that internet safety policy, and then once that happens, then you're fully compliant. For more detailed information, and you have access to this PowerPoint presentation, we've given you 3 links for you to check out, and they will also give you a lot more information. On top of that, excuse me, Congress then later on voted on the Protecting Children in the 21st Century. It supplements your SIPA policy. It was enacted in 2008, but it actually became effective in July 1st, 2012. It requires the applicant to meet certain requirements regarding education of minors and cyberbullying awareness and response. We'll give you a little bit more detail in here in a minute. For those of you that are librarians in the group, this does not apply to you. So here are the requirements for protecting children in the 21st century. Schools must educate minors about the appropriate online behavior, including interacting with other individuals on social networking websites and in chat rooms. This does not apply to adults. Schools must promote cyberbullying awareness and response. Schools must update their internet safety policies to address these new requirements. And as I mentioned earlier, the activities must have been in place by July 1st, 2012. You do not need to have a new board meeting if, in fact, this needs to be updated. Social networking and cyberbullying are not defined, nor are specific procedures or curricula detailed for schools and used for educating students. Congress's intent was that this and how you would apply and what you decide is offensive, what's not offensive, how you're going to disseminate this information out to the students, staff, to your community. They leave all of those types of decisions up to you. They don't want to get involved in the actual process. They just want to make sure that you have it. Resources that are available to assist in this process if needed. And we've given you a couple of here, like onguardonline.gov. Again, we've given you another link that you may want to check out. So that's the SIPA portion of the presentation. Are there any questions? I know we kind of flew through this, but there's not a lot of new information. This is just old information that we need to make sure that we've given out to those that are new to the process this year. Any other questions? Okay, second part that I'm going to talk about is document retention. Prior to July 23rd, 2014, our document retention policy said that we needed to keep everything for 5 years after the end of service. After the 7th report and order, now it stipulates that we must keep everything for 10 years after the last date of service. The 5th report and order that came out 4 or 5 years ago provided clarification on what documents should be retained. I'll kind of go through those real quick. Documentation of SIPA compliance. One of the first things an E-rate auditor is going to ask is, show me that you are SIPA compliant. So they're going to want to look at that public notice. When did you have that board meeting? Was it approved? Show us the board minutes. Show us that you have a filter in place. Show us what your internet access policy IP looks like. So you're going to need to keep all of that. So one of the other things they really key in on a lot is the bidding process that you followed to procure your E-rate services. So they're going to want to see that you have still to this day all of the bidding RFPs, all of the bids received, any and all communications that went on during that bidding process with the bidders, service providers, and consultants, and that you did have a bid evaluation matrix and wanted to see the process then that you followed and that you used to award that contract to the service provider. On top of that, on the Category 1 services, they're going to want to see the bills during that funding year. They're going to want to see, because there is USAC assumes that you are monitoring all of your bills, that you're monitoring all of the E-rate discounts that you are getting from your service providers. They're assuming that you're reconciling that and making sure that if, for the sake of argument, you got $100,000 in E-rate discounts, that you can quantify and qualify where those discounts came from and that you received them all. You're going to need to keep all of your USAC forms, your letters, your correspondence, all of that information that went back and forth during the review process. If in fact you've procured some Category 2 services, lots of switches, wireless access points, those types of things that you can show that you have all of that inventory in place. You can go out and by serial number go back and identify where all of that equipment is, verify that it's still on the same site where it was supposed to be, and probably a network diagram of what your network looks like. USACs, we've also given you a link to a table of contents that's a great reference tool also. The document retention, that's what you're going to need to keep. Any questions about document retention? The other thing that I just kind of harp on, and it's kind of one of my things that I get frustrated about, is that we work very, very hard to compile, make sure that we've done everything that we need to do per E-rate, but unfortunately you're reliant on several other folks within your district to get you material. It could be the budget that you're working off of, it could be your free and reduced lunch counts, and those are being run by different departments. And I would suggest that you have a conversation with those departments also and let them know that all of that supporting documentation, for the sake of argument, that Provision 2 survey that went out for your food service department, that all of those surveys, all of that information is kept for that same 10 years. So does that food service manager know that that's something that they are supposed to include? They need to know that. So you're going to have to take the lead in communicating that information to them. So any questions? I'm not that good. Come on, guys. Okay, program compliance. Excuse me.
Okay, so this next section is just sort of a standard review that is based on USAC slides for basic tenets of compliance with the E-rate program. We have this wonderful new E-rate 2.0 where the program has been transformed in so many ways, but there are still some basic concepts and rules that you need to understand as far as requirements of essentially the universe that participates in E-rate, which are applicants, service providers, and consultants, and sort of what the appropriate roles are and what are sort of the rules of engagement under this program. So in the next two slides, there is a little bit of redundancy to the competitive bidding section, but honestly, these are the areas that we see that are the most problematic for E-rate applicants to maintain compliance with the program and continue to have successful funding. So it's just really critical that everyone understands what these requirements are. Okay. Not letting me advance. Yes.
In terms of document retention, some schools, if they file this year, they couldn't go back 10 years. So what is the document date? When does that really start and how far back can they reach at this point?
Okay, so the indications that we have from the FCC is that the rules were effective as of when the order was published in the Federal Register. So, which was back in November-ish?
And
well, it was the erratum. Then they had some corrections. So I think around November-ish. So essentially effective November, that's when they are stating that 10-year rule goes into effect. So previously, it was a 5-year rule. So we're thinking that it's going to be, for anything that would be approaching its 5-year elapsed time period, that 5 years has now gone to 10 years. So it's not like that it's starting just funding year 2015 that the 10-year requirement is going into play. It's even funding requests going back all the way to 2009, or 2008, which it appears that 5-year retention period would have elapsed, that it actually is now not elapsed, and that it's going on another 5 years. And we have seen, Fred, I don't know, we have seen in audits, and USAC has just launched a round of BCAP audits that they are going back potentially as far back as we've seen 2006. So there's no statute of limitations, I guess, anymore, as far as the FCC is concerned. They can pull that 10-year card out if even on older funding requests. It's not something that is, it's as of this date moving forward. It's, okay, everything that was sort of open to the retention period, now your retention period has just expanded.
Okay, thank you for that one.
I know, is that great? Okay, so I'm on slide 94, and we are talking about our program compliance and the different roles of the players in the E-rate program. And we have your applicant, service provider, and consultant. And the applicant is responsible for filing the Form 470 and indicating if there will be an RFP, evaluating the bids, and selecting the winning service provider, and filing the Form 471 and Item 21 attachments during the application window. The applicant is also responsible for responding to inquiries from PIA, filing the Form 486. Now note that there's some language in these slides, and these actually came directly from USAC, but they have some outdated information in here as far as like technology plans. But essentially, I know it's not interesting, but these were currently what's on USAC's website. But note that the technology plan is not required for funding year 2015 moving forward for any funding request. So filing the Form 486 and essentially indicating that you are compliant with SIPA, and selecting the invoicing method and filing the Form 472 or the BEAR form, if that is the invoicing method that's desired, and documentation of your compliance with FCC rules on an ongoing basis, and then retain that documentation for 10 years. Service providers can respond to Form 470s and RFPs once they have been issued. They can assist applicants with preparing their Form 471 Item 21 attachments, but note that they can't help applicants prepare their Form 470. That would be considered to be a rule violation. Service providers can provide technical answers on questions regarding specific goods and services requested, but not on competitive bidding questions. They also are responsible for filing the Form 473, which is an annual form that they have to file in order to be able to process payments through USAC system. It's called the Service Provider Annual Certification Form, or SPAC. Note that if a service provider does not keep up with filing its SPAC, that it cannot invoice USAC for E-rate discounts. So it's really important that they do that, and they file the Form 474 Service Provider Invoice, or SPI. And they also are subject to the 10-year documentation retention rule. Consultants are required to have a consultant registration number, and if an applicant uses a consultant in a fee-based relationship, then the applicant is to list the consulting firm and the name of the consultant on the FCC forms where applicable. Consultants can either be service provider consultants or applicants, and when they are acting in the role of as a consultant, they should act as either the applicant or the service provider, depending on how that relationship is established. It's really important for consultants to avoid conflicts of interest, such as acting as both a service provider and applicant consultant. And consultants must also maintain documentation for 10 years. As Fred went into extensively in the competitive bidding section, competitive bidding is sort of the basic premise for this program. The way I like to put it is that most of these services, the bulk of the cost is being paid for by the FCC, and the FCC wants to see that the funds are being expended in a responsible manner with cost-effective service. And so the expectation and the rules are that every single service that is associated with the funding request must have been competitively bid somehow. The requirement, and that the bidding process is fair and open to any possible bidder that would want to participate. We touched a little bit on the Form 470. The Form 470 is what kicks off the competitive bidding process, and it indicates the services and categories of service for the services that are being sought. The second bullet point is actually old, and it does not apply now for funding year 2015. Moving forward, the technology plan requirement was eliminated for funding year 2015. The Form 470 kicks off the 28-day process. It's also where applicants indicate if they have an RFP. It also indicates if there are any special requirements or disqualification factors and who will be receiving services. So here we go back to our rules again. Only applicants can determine the types of services you will seek on a Form 470. You do not want a service provider telling you what to put on your Form 470. You don't want a service provider to be preparing your Form 470. That would be a big problem. And only applicants can negotiate with prospective bidders or run the competitive bidding process. None of these steps should be forfeited to a service provider at any stage. Applicants cannot have a relationship with a service provider that would unfairly influence the outcome of competition. That would, such as where that service provider has inside information or access to inside information that other bidders would not have, thus tainting the bidding process. Applicants cannot have an ownership interest in a service provider company that is bidding for services. applicants cannot violate their own ethical regulations policy. So if you have an ethics policy, you must follow your own policy. Applicant cannot fail to describe the desired products and services with sufficient specificity to enable interested parties to bid. This is really interesting, and this, the FTC really hammered home hard on this in the sixth report and order, which was issued in 2011, because they got so many complaints from service providers saying, well, we see all these applicants that have 470s out, but they have so little information on them, we don't even know how to submit a bid. And I'm contacting the applicant and they won't return my phone call. So the FTC said, okay, that's a valid complaint. So when you are preparing your Form 470, or better yet, if you have an RFP, which is a document that will allow you to have a lot more information available to bidders, put yourself in the service provider's shoes and think, is this enough information for them to be able to submit to you a bid, a valid quote? Does it have enough information so that they can submit you a quote? Because if they feel like they're not getting enough information and they feel like you're non-responsive, they can pick up the phone and call you back and complain.
And they do.
And they do, all the time. Applicants also cannot receive gifts or donations from service providers that violate FCC rules or seek to circumvent FCC rules, and I'll go into that a little bit later in the presentation. So what kind of interchanges can applicants and service providers have? Because it's not realistic to think that an applicant cannot have any discussions at all with service providers or manufacturers in trying to learn about services that are out there and really do some research on service provider offerings. So applicants and service providers can have pre-bidding discussions. They could have a meeting to discuss new product offerings. The service provider can teach the applicant about new technologies and do product demonstrations. Those are all allowed. Applicants and service providers can provide or receive de minimis items. That means items that are of value of less than $20, or essentially have very little value to them at all and would not be considered to be a gift. So that would be modest refreshments, not offered as part of a meal. So if you went to a seminar and they had coffee and donuts, that would be acceptable. But if you went to a meeting that was at Morton's Steakhouse, that would not be acceptable. Items with little intrinsic value, such as certificates or plaques, would be okay. But if a service provider gave you a bag of golf clubs, that would not be okay.
What if they're from Target?
I haven't priced a Target golf set, so I couldn't say that if it's less than $20.
Okay.
Let's talk about your request for proposal. If you have a request for proposal, remember that the FCC and USAC may call something a request for proposal, and the way that we've interpreted it, especially in this group, our focus group, is really any document that you have that has any information beyond the Form 470. So if it's even information posted on your website or a single sheet of paper that has some specific information that's not on your 470, we would consider that, for the purposes of the E-rate program, an RFP. Now, the FCC does not require that you have an RFP, but as I think Fred eloquently spoke to, state and local procurement rules may vary. So if you have a question as to whether your procurement requires an RFP, it's very wise to consult with your purchasing department, legal counsel, perhaps your county office, if they have resources to see if your procurement would require a formal RFP. The RFP documents themselves must be available to bidders for at least 28 days. So we have our 28-day window that was started with the Form 470, If your RFP is not available on the day that you post your Form 470, but it's later available at a later date, perhaps you give out your RFP at a job lock, the day that that RFP is given to the service providers or made available to them starts your 28-day clock, because that's a significant amount of information that is related to the services that you're seeking, and the service providers must have at least 28 days, according to the FCC, to be able to evaluate that information and respond with the bid. That's a really great question. So the question is, if I do an addendum, do I have to restart the 28-day clock? And this is, I think, an issue that has been debated up and down with USAC. So the USAC states if you have any material changes to the scope of your procurement, then you must restart the 28-day clock. If it's just clarification, so the bidders are submitting to you questions and there are clarifications that don't materially change the scope, then you would not have to extend the 28-day clock. But if it is, oh, well, we forgot a school, we forgot to list a school, or we decided that we were only going to do half of the school, but now we're doing the entire school, and that would be considered to be a material change, at least in my experience. The program. Okay. So here's some pitfalls that you can run into with posting your Form 470 and RFP. First of all, with the Form 470, it's really critical that you understand the category of service that you are applying for. I think this is going to be a very interesting year, particularly in Category 2, since we now have 3 categories under Category 2. We have internal connections, basic maintenance of internal connections, and managed internal broadband services. And I guess what I would say, if you're not sure what category to put it in every category. Particularly with the managed internal broadband services, because in some cases the description of services might be very similar to basic maintenance, and depending on the solution that's provided, it could actually be considered basic maintenance. So if you're at all in doubt, it wouldn't hurt to post in multiple categories rather than fewer categories. We talked about having the sufficient enough detail on your Form 470 to enable service providers to formulate bids. So you really cannot provide just generic descriptions, such as all eligible services. Or you can't go from the eligible services list and list every single possible eligible service on your Form 470. That would be considered actually an FCC rule violation. You really need to be specific enough, such as we want digital transmission services, we want a 50 megabit service, and we want it delivered at this address. So it gives them the type of service, the bandwidth, and the location. I think that is fair and provides enough detail. You can't just provide laundry lists of things that you aren't necessarily interested in procuring. That's considered to be not a legitimate procurement. I think Fred touched on these points in his presentation as well, but there are some imposing restrictions when doing a 470 or bid. One is that you cannot specify a particular make or model or brand when you are specifying your desired services without allowing for equivalent. And unfortunately, even if your Board of Education has adopted a specific type of technology, perhaps your district has standardized on a particular technology, that is not allowed under E-rate. So say perhaps you have adopted I'm going to say a non-E-rate company that we don't see, like Xerox, that we've adopted Xerox. You can't say, well, I want Xerox XYZ. You have to say Xerox or equivalent.
You could even say Xerox XYZ so they know what kind of make or model, like of a router or switch, but you definitely have to make sure you put or equivalent.
Correct.
Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying, Brett. So you can, in order to help the bidders know specifically what type of, say you're doing a switch and you want a power race Ethernet switch with X number of ports, and you have a specific model in mind that you feel that meets your minimum technical requirements, you can list that, but you have to allow for equivalence. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay, so I think that's a really great scenario. So here's a scenario where there's a specific manufacturer, in this case it's Aruba, where you already have a controller, and you don't want to buy another controller. You have an existing controller, but you want to buy more access points, and it has to work with that controller. In order to meet the letter of the law of E-rate, you could specify that Aruba access point. You would have to say or equivalent, but you could also say must be compatible with XYZ controller.
Can I make another suggestion? So, not that you, in your particular case, you want to make fine. The next way to tackle would be I can use that as part of my life.
And have it have a very high weight. I agree with you, Fred. The second weight after the price.
And I can't emphasize enough from the IT side that you can, besides the equivalent, you can say, and the vendor must demonstrate equal and compatibility with existing infrastructure.
Yeah.
Because you're not like telling them they can't quote something else, but it must be compatible. And if you're going to say like the management thing, then I would say, incompatible with our existing Aruba, try to say Aruba XYZ management.
I think too, as the applicant, you can require proof. If a bidder comes in with a different solution and is making claims right and left that okay, yes, it will work with your system, then okay, prove it. You can do that. You don't just have to accept it at face value. You can ask for them to prove it, provide documentation, so that you are satisfied.
In your case, I would be very so all manufacturer that makes value.
Another really important thing to address in your RFP or 470 is if you have disqualification criteria. If there are things that a service provider must do in order for their bid to be accepted, that needs to be outlined in your Form 470 or RFP. So if there's a mandatory job loss, that you will not accept any bids from any bidders that don't attend your job loss, you need to have that in your Form 470 or RFP. If they must have a license, maybe they need to have a C7 or a C10 license, and they must have that in order for you to accept their proposal, and that needs to be spelled. Anything that would potentially disqualify them, it must be spelled out in the 470 or RFP. So again, we're going to touch on the documentation process. So when you are evaluating bids, you need to retain all of your vendor selection documentation for 10 years, winning and losing bids. Okay, so your E-rate paperwork has just gotten huge because those binders usually are pretty big. But you need to keep winning and losing bids. When you are doing your evaluation, I recommend, because think about this, 10 years from now, you might not be around in the same position. You might not even be at the same district. when you are doing your evaluation and you're assigning criteria and scoring, take notes of why you did. What was your thought process in assigning scores? Because USAC might come back and challenge you and say, well, why did you give vendor A this score and vendor B a different score? You know, what was the rationale? And even I know myself, thinking back 2 weeks ago, I don't remember everything. So having to go back 10 years and trying to justify your process.
One word, ginseng.
So it just is helpful. The more documentation you have, the better. That can help refresh your memory. If you're in an audit situation and you're being put to the test as to, or challenged as to why you awarded one over the other, you want to be able to justify your selection. As Fred mentioned, the price of the E-rate eligible goods and services must be given the most weight, but that doesn't have to be the only weight in an evaluation process. Evaluation must begin after the 28 days. And this is a very important one. Service providers cannot pay for an applicant's termination charges incurred in breaking a contract. So, excuse me. So if you're in a 5-year contract for service and you decide you want to look at some other options on the marketplace, and a new bidder comes in and offers to pay, oh, well, if you come with us, we'll pay for your cancellation fees under your existing contract, that's not allowed. Okay, this is just reiterating the cost of eligible services given the highest weight. There's a link in this slide deck that will take you to an example on USAC's website if you have any questions as to what an evaluation process might look like. And then Rachel also had a nice example earlier in the deck. Contracts. Contracts are also another critical aspect in this program. And this is another area where applicants can get into trouble. The contracts must be executed, signed and dated by the applicant after the 28 days, but before submitting the 471. If you're in an audit and you can't show that contract was signed before you posted your Form 471, your funding is pretty much at risk. And Fred mentions the purchase order issue and the contract extension. Okay, state master contracts. In California, we have a couple of state master contracts that are used often in E-rate, such as CMAS, CalNet, WSCA. These are contracts that are authorized by the state for use by public agencies in the state. There are different types of contracts that could be made available. One is there's a single winner. Oftentimes there are multiple winners, and there are multiple award schedules. I don't know if you're planning on addressing the state contracts at any future date. I know there's a presentation or historical information on the CalNet process that is available on K12HSN's website that has extensive examples of how to do a mini bid process. So we would recommend that you go to the K12HSN website and reference those materials on the CalNet contract as far as how to conduct a mini bid under a state master contract. Okay, and I think this is close to the last slide in the section, and I'm on slide 110, paying the non-discounted share. This is, again, another area where applicants can get into trouble. It is a program requirement that the applicants pay their share of costs after the E-rate discount is applied. This must happen. The service provider cannot waive this. The service provider can't say, well, I'll bill USAC for 90% and I'll just waive your 10%. That is a rule violation right there. So you must pay your share. And you can't receive a charitable donation from a provider entity with which the selected service provider has a relationship. So the service provider can't give you a charitable donation that would help you offset your share. You cannot ignore your service provider bills. And in fact, you are obligated to pay those bills within 90 days under the program rules. And in an E-rate audit, they will test to see if you paid your bills within 90 days. So do not pay your bills. And if an applicant show proof of payment during an invoice review, the invoice may be denied or your funding may be rescinded altogether. And that's it for the program compliance piece of it. Do we have any questions? Everybody go to sleep.
You guys remember there's a fake iPad that I have. Made of cardboard. It's the thought that counts.
That's because everybody is so good and they understand all the rules and they abide by all the rules. So that's it. Okay. Thank you.
No, I don't. Can you guys hear me out there?
Yeah.
Okay, we're good. Thank you. They were asking if that we need some volume. What kind of increase in the sound level? All right, we're just about end here for the day. Slide 112. Okay, this is my version of David Letterman. Remember when you used to have the show the top 6, top whatever? So what I have here is the top 6 things to remember. As soon as there we go. Uh-oh, I think I pressed it twice. Yep, I did. Gotta be patient, it takes a second. Okay, number 6. Form 471 window opens January 14th and closes on March 26th. That was 2 days ago. Last possible day, number 5, to post a Form 470 is February 26th. Don't wait that long. That's what I call extreme E-rate. Number 4, file your Form 470 now. Number 3, begin preparing Form 471 templates and 471 receipts of services list. Number 2, you can tell we think you're all a bunch of procrastinators here. Don't wait till the last week to start Form 471. It's human nature. We're not procrastinators, we're perfectionists. That's what I like to say. And that was pretty good. It came off the top of my head. I should do fortune cookies or something. I don't know. That's my next career. All right, number 1. Expect to spend more time on your Form 471 than you ever have in your entire life. Yep, and we have some nods in the head for those that were 471 Mavericks. Okay. So I only have one more slide after this, and it has to do with the CTF. For those that didn't go to the beginners, it's pretty much going to be kind of the state California Teleconnect Fund an update. But before that, I kind of want to let you guys know what our game plan for training is moving forward. We'll have webinars specifically discuss topics. Example might be if something happens in terms of 471 when we were talking about the FRN and the breaking out of the Category 2. We do plan on doing a canned webinar about the Category 2, doing your own Form 471 online. In fact, we might even go ahead and make that one a live once we have questions, but then we'll record it. So those are examples, and Rachel and I will be working next week to come up with a master schedule since we're getting close to the end. And we kind of anticipate, because I apologize that some of this stuff has been kind of like changed in the schedule in the last minute, but that's because they were promised some certain dates of deliverables by USAC, and they did their best job, and then they changed the dates on us. So that's why we modified. But we feel like if we can set your schedule for some webinar dates, like maybe it'll be every Thursday at 10 and 2. Maybe it's every Friday. We'll figure that out over the next week and send some communication out in the next week and a half. So don't forget you can sign up at the K-12 HSN and then join the K-12 or CDE E-rate listserv. Make sure you monitor that. And I have to hand, we had a great team, and we've had a lot go out in terms of the listserv about every other week. And it's not overwhelming, but I think it's good, timely information. Okay, just kind of a refresher, a reminder, the California Teleconnect Fund went through the same process that we did with what they call the NPRM for E-rate and the changes in the order we were discussing earlier. So California Teleconnect Fund is a discount system that's after E-rate. So they did their proposal last winter, and then the staff actually came up with a recommendation. And there was a lot more to it, to the CBOs, community-based organizations, nonprofit healthcare, as well as schools and libraries that are eligible. So they had, I believe, it was about a 74-page document of recommendations by the PUC staff. And this is kind of boiled down to the potential areas that affect us as K-12 or libraries. One is to have VoIP and voice mirror E-rate. Well, back in May, we didn't know that there was going to be a phase down of their VoIP services or voice. So that's still in the question. Are they going to do the phase down, or are they going to keep it at 50%? So that's one of the questions right there. The other part of it, so we don't know when that's going to happen as far as if it's going to be effective on July 1st if they do change it. However, I do anticipate clarification by the end of the first quarter of this coming year, or this year, already here, or sometime in the second quarter, meaning by the end of June. I had the opportunity with some others to meet with Commissioner Peterman, and we kind of asked her the time frame, and that's kind of what she gave us. And it was still definitely an open discussion with her. I think in past trainings I kind of described the opportunity that you could give comments. I think she's received a lot of good input, and there was a formal process that ended back in mid-October, but there's nothing as public servants, you know, the PUC is in that category, also that you couldn't provide some kind of communication to her encouraging it. And I know myself and others in Department of Ed plan on getting some specific numbers, statistics, so that the Commissioner has that information when making the final decision. The other one, the third bullet point, was a moratorium because of all the changes. I think the staff was concerned that they needed to kind of put a hold on new applications for a while. I don't anticipate that one would affect us. The other part of it is we're going through the list on the California PUC site, and we're looking to see if there's any districts that do not have a CTF number, and then we're going to be outreaching to them over the next few weeks to try to make sure you know how to fill out the form, and then Cindy in my office or myself or Rachel will give you a hand if you need that. But we want to make sure all schools, and then I'll talk to Jared about that, see if there's anything we can do to help out the library side. Eliminated support entirely for nonprofit private schools that have a less than 40% free reduced lunch. So again, here's the link for the more specific information about it, the proposal by the staff. So I have the last slide as our contact. I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions first here in the local audience. Guys have anything? Okay. Video conference plan?
I'd like to clarify. Unless a school has a CPS code, they don't qualify for a school like that. They don't qualify as a school. If they're taking the individual sites, thinking like the partner schools that have individual sites, but they're actually one school. It's one district school, one school district. So they don't have individual CPS codes for each one of the sites. Is that correct?
Well, I think it depends on the particular charter and the structure.
Okay, and I'm following you so far, so that could be corrected. One group of charters and one CDS. So what is the rest of your question?
Okay, so when they apply for space, they don't, back to what about right? The school calls one school and apply for all the school sites inside that school. Is that correct? Under one CPS code.
Enrollment that is one site that where the enrollment is recorded under that CPS system. All those kids are spread among multiple locations.
Correct. Can I clarify that?
That's a good question. How about we write that one down and we can make her comment.
And I'm with the authority for that. This is how we were told to set it up at the beginning when we first started. We are an independent, multi-story charter school, and we serve the entire county. We have one CPS code. We are our own school district, but we have different private where essentially call them like learning centers or something like that, but they each have an entity number, but we have one built entity number, and we are one school district. We just happen to serve where teachers meet with students or students come to do some groups and classes in different places over the county. I mean, that's how I was told I knew that to set it up in the first place. No idea how it's done. And so are we, you know, how does that work? How they like calculate system.
I think, interestingly enough, your question right now is being evaluated as a test. And,
Yeah, it says around the fringes, bunch of.
yeah, you reach the satellite location section, fall back with category 2. Any other questions?
Yeah. So it's kind of a twofold question that we actually were on a call. A twofold question we were on a call this morning where that was brought up in the DSAC said huddle. So they didn't really have a response, and it was one is how do you count the site as well as free and reduced lunch? How does that look? Because now we do a district-wide average, or in this case a charter-wide average. But if the site isn't an entity, then what does that look like? So one thing that we have as a tool now is that news flash that we're trying to do through the listserv. So that's something that Rachel's doing a great job of tracking those. And when we get some information and answers, we'll put that in the news flash. And I had one question here on the webinar. What about adding addendums? Do we need to start the 28-day window again? And I kind of go back to what Kathy had said. If it's kind of a minimal amount of information, but if it changes the outcome in terms of the quotes, then you would have to start your 28 days. Because everyone has a little bit of a different definition or view of what an addendum is. But if it's clarification, it's just kind of a minor clarification. But if it changes the scope to any significant level, then you do need to start the 28 days over again. Remote audience, video conference, any other questions?
I got a question, Russ. So, in reference to the training that you're going to be putting online, will Rachel be doing that 471 again?
Yes, absolutely. She sounds better than I do when it's recorded. Okay, yes, she'll do the 471. We're probably going to do it in the Camtasia because it's a little bit easier for our for production, and also for putting it up on the website.
Yeah, because I missed it here, so it didn't come up on the screen.
Yeah, it'll. Today's, I think, out of the yesterday and today, we'll probably put today's training up on the site, and then when we do next week, we'll kind of swap it out, and we'll put our webinar, so you'll be able to see the webinar. And I think our colleagues in Imperial probably will have that done by Tuesday. They're usually pretty quick, maybe Wednesday at the latest.
Great, thank you.
Okay. I don't know about you guys, but I'm feeling a little brain dead, so it's been a long day. Plus, we're kind of in shock after having, some of us had 2 weeks off at the break, and so still getting back in the swing. But we have Monday off, okay? So we're good. A couple, 4 days a week. 4-day week next week and the following. Has nothing to do with E-rate today. Any other questions? I'm just waiting for you to percolate if you have anything else. Okie dokie. Well, thanks for your time, and we will be sending out a survey that'll help us improve it. Plus, we take both criticisms, that's great to help us do that, as well as if there's anything constructive, and also if there's anything you like, so we can continue to do that. And feedback in a positive direction will help us also. So thanks. Have a good afternoon, and most of you hopefully won't hit too much of the freeway. So thanks again. Oh, yeah, sure.
One of the schools is splitting because there's most big sites. Can't handle all that on one site. They were just one site, and because of the concept of the name is the same, they decided to change the name of the high school name, and their address is too many to fit at one site. What do you do about that?
Is the new site going to have a different CDS code?
No, it's the same, currently the same school, there's another site, learning center. Basically.
Are they like very proximity to one another? I've seen where high schools like just kind of stretch across the street.
It's the same town, the same area, just they have to get another campus, so high school.
Yeah, if you're not getting a new CDS code, and if the administration of that site is considering all one campus just with some physical, I don't see how you would be able to do anything other than just treat it as a single site if there's not a separate CDS code. Yeah, you would have to have it as a separate entity. Yeah, separate entity number, and since it's a new location, you may be familiar with that, but you can do it through submitted question. I went under the fax number, the address, the phone number. So yeah, make it a separate entity. Because otherwise, under an audit, under an audit, they'll want to see that there's a different address because you'll probably have a different WAN connection, separate data line.
Okay, so we need to get, we found the original one because, what they did was they had the high school and they had the elementary together on one campus.
Oh, so you are.
One had their own.
So are you closing down the site? Because I thought you were just expanding and growing to another location.
No, they moved the high school to a different location because the elementary school grew together and it now both the elementary school and high school on the same campus.
Okay, so then.
Moved to a different site.
So then, yes, you would get an entity number, and you would have that for the new location. And then you might need to. What was that? Are you closing the old one?
No, not just moved and renamed itself.
Okay, yeah, still you'll need to get another entity number.
So do we take and delete, do we cancel the other one?
What? Oh, but okay. So the original site, what was it? An elementary, a K-12? What was it?
It was K-12, but they had separate entity numbers because of the way I don't know. They have separate entity numbers for the high school and the elementary. They house them on the same campus.
Well, you're.
Or something.
Yeah, you'll just go back and change the address of the second entity number, and then did you say that the name was going to change?
They changed the name.
Okay.
And I said, what? Why did you change the name? And he said, well.
Yeah, I think because I'm getting confused. Just get another entity number. No, I think honestly, I was looking at the panel. I'm just kidding. They suggested that you get a separate new entity number for the new location.
They had her.
Yeah. So that's my. To cancel the old one, are you not going to be using it anymore? Yeah, if you're not going to be using that entity number, it's probably a good maintenance item to ask them to get rid of that entity number.
Okay, thank you. It's a good idea because sometimes mistakenly other people will pull that entity up and then you'll start getting paperwork on something.
Yep. Yeah, because I was just thinking, yeah, you can either do it the best way, which is more work, or you can take the shortcut, and then when someone does a zip code search, they pop it in there accidentally. So, yeah, good idea, Mary.
Thank you. Great time, guys. This is the best one we've been at.
Oh, good. Yeah, thank you. That's because you guys made it good. All those questions.
You got the iPad.
Yeah. It's a fake iPad. My daughter will help me draw it on a piece of cardboard tomorrow. All right. Thanks, everyone. Safe travels. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.